Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. More strikes on Beirut as Benjamin Netanyahu rejects calls for a ceasefire and tells Israel's military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. US State Secretary Antony Blinken saying the world agrees on the need for a ceasefire ahead of meeting Israeli officials in New York. And Ukraine's President Zelensky thanks the White House for a further $8 billion in aid, rounding off his trip stateside. The health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza has released new data on the number of deaths since the war began when Hamas militants attacked Israel on October 7th. As of today, at least 41,534 people have been killed in Gaza in the war between Israel and Palestinian militants. The toll includes 39 deaths in the previous 24 hours. Well, for more on the state of conflict between Israel and its neighbours, not only in Gaza but across the border in Lebanon as well, I'm joined now by our correspondent, Sarah Coates. And Sarah, let's begin with this. Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel Katz rejecting hopes for a 21-day ceasefire. Tell us more.
Certainly, and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it wasn't very long ago that he did land in New York ahead of his address at the UN General Assembly. Tomorrow he came out to say, our policy is clear. We will continue attacking Hezbollah with all our might. And we also heard from the Foreign Minister Israel Katz a little earlier in the day. He said, there will be no ceasefire in the north. We will continue to fight against the terrorist organisation Hezbollah with all our might until victory and until the safe return of the residents of the north to their homes. So there certainly is a lot of pushback here in Israel over this ceasefire plan with Hezbollah, and we're hearing pretty strong wording also coming out from a couple of people that do keep Benjamin Netanyahu in power. That is the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and also the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. And they've been real fierce opponents of any kind of ceasefire in this region. They've been saying to Benjamin Netanyahu that they'll pull out of the government if he makes an irresponsible deal with Hamas in Gaza. But now they're basically saying the same thing again when it comes to Hezbollah. And that is, according to Ben-Gvir, he says we'll leave the government, we'll collapse his coalition. And we do need to remember here that Benjamin Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure. He's desperately trying to remain in power, and these are the people who keep them there. So certainly this is not surprising, and we can expect to hear more statements like this from Israeli officials.
Yeah, and just about 24 hours ago, we were hearing about potential intention to send troops across the border there into Lebanon, boots on the ground. What else have we been hearing out of Israel's military today in terms of intentions and what's going on in Lebanon?
Well, it is important to mention this targeted strike that happened in southern Beirut just a couple of hours ago. The military claims that it has killed yet another Hezbollah commander, this one of a drone unit. Still no confirmation from Hezbollah, but this is significant given that it is in Beirut, the fourth time this week that the Israeli military has struck in that area. And we are also hearing some pretty worrying rhetoric coming from the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi. He says the military must continue to strike the terror group. He says we need to keep attacking. We have been waiting for years for this opportunity. He also went on to say we are constantly working to eliminate more Hezbollah commanders. Now, we also do need to point out that the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, he's approved additional plans, operational plans for the Israeli military. And there is a lot of concern, really, within the global community and right around this region over the prospect of a ground operation in over that border there into Lebanon, and this is certainly something that has not been ruled out by the Israeli government. So this, of course, is very worrying. Israel does have the advantage when it comes to this aerial campaign, but certainly it would be a very different situation when it comes to a ground campaign. And we have to remember here that Hezbollah is estimated to have around 150 rockets. Many of them can reach anywhere in Israel, and these Hezbollah fighters, they are battle-hardened after fighting in the Syrian civil war. So this is of great concern, of course, to the international community, and if indeed there were to be a ground operation, it would likely have catastrophic results and would likely have a very high death toll on both sides of this border.
And look, despite the aerial bombardment, the advantage that Israel has with that and the targeted strikes on Hezbollah commanders, Hezbollah is still firing rockets into northern Israel today. It certainly is, and the last red alerts, air raid sirens went off in the north 20 or so minutes ago, and this has really been continuing throughout the day. According to the Israeli military, more than 150 rockets have been fired over into Israeli territory throughout the course of the day. Many of these were intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defence system. Others haven't been intercepted. Some have hit houses, others open areas. And these residents who have remained in these largely evacuated communities of Israel's north, many of them have spent the day inside bomb shelters. And this has really been the reality for them for these past few weeks. And of course, since October 8, and this is when Hezbollah began firing rockets into Israel, saying that it's doing so in solidarity with the people in Gaza, saying that it will not stop until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. Just finally, Sarah, in terms of the idea that Israel could send troops over the border into southern Lebanon, how would that go down with the Israeli public, do you think?
Very surprising, actually. There has been a poll that's just been carried out exactly on this, and 73% of responders came out to say that they believe a war in Lebanon is actually necessary. And this number was even higher when you're talking to these people in these largely evacuated northern communities. I've actually spent a fair bit of time up there talking to these people over the last few months, and really the sentiment there with them is all the same. They've been very, very angry at the Israeli government for not changing the status quo, for not changing the security situation on the ground. They've told me that they feel like they've been left alone. They've been given no support from the government. They desperately want to go back home. We're talking here more than 60,000 internally displaced people, and they're really fed up. So it is a lot of these people in the north that are really gunning for this status quo to be changed, the Israeli military to go in there and push these Hezbollah fighters further north, back up behind the Litani River. So it is gaining a lot of support. And in saying this, coming back to Benjamin Netanyahu again, this is once again seeing his popularity surge. And it really did go down in the wake of October 7. But now with this new campaign, it is once again on the rise.
Sarah Coates, live for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Well, to get more on this story, I'm joined from Beirut now by the director of the Issam Farah's Institute for Public Policy at the American University of Beirut, Professor Joseph Bahout. Professor, let's talk about Israel seemingly rejecting the ceasefire, this hoped-for 21-day plan put forward by 12 allies earlier. What was your reaction to that?
Frankly, in a way or another, one cannot be very much surprised by that, because Benjamin Netanyahu's course of action over the past 10 months in Gaza has been a little bit similar. You know, every time there was a serious proposal put by the Americans and other Westerners on the table, he has relinquished it after adding several conditions. For this one in particular, I think that his more or less this squares with his calculus. You know, he's been eroding Hezbollah's capabilities for now more than a month, persistently, and some of the blows have really dealt high damages to Hezbollah. I think that the Israeli establishment probably perceives that, as your correspondent was saying, there is now a golden opportunity to do what the Israelis call themselves mowing the lawn in neighboring countries. They know that they cannot finish off Hezbollah completely, but probably that now they are perceiving an opportunity to maybe degrade and erode the party's capability for a long time. So in a way, what this shows is that the real aim of Netanyahu is not only or exactly to bring back the northern North Israel villagers to their villages, because he could do that by accepting the ceasefire agreement and a muscular resolution 1701, but it increasingly appears that the real aim of this war in Lebanon is not exactly that, or is not only that, and that there are other aims which he seems to be fulfilling by now. The question will become how long will Hezbollah accept or remain without a stronger reaction, if they can, because we don't know how much they have been incapacitated by the blows. And at that moment, the role, I mean, the possibility of this going to an all-out war with a ground offensive becomes increasingly possible.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has also threatened to leave the government if Netanyahu agreed to a permanent ceasefire. How does that dynamic affect their government and the ability to get a ceasefire?
Yeah, as we were saying, this is exactly the same scenario that has been played out for the last 10 months in Gaza. Every time Netanyahu is giving signs that he's ready to accept something, a deal that would free the hostages, that would temporarily or durably halt the war in Gaza, his right-winger ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the likes, were jumping to the fray and saying, if you do that, we will quit the government. Now they are doing the same, with the difference that maybe a larger spectrum in Israel, and your correspondent was saying that, be it in the public opinion in Israel or in the cabinet, Gallant and etc., are more or less on the same page. So I think that the mood in Israel today politically is for a prolongation of the operations in Lebanon, probably upscaling them, hitting Hezbollah harder and harder, expecting that the party is losing its means, and that ultimately it will accept, of course, a revised resolution in the south, but on the way towards that, Israel would have gained an eroded Hezbollah, a degraded and weakened Hezbollah. Now, if things don't go this direction, if Hezbollah proves in the coming weeks to be more resistant than that, I think that the Israeli planners will be faced with another critical decision. Will they have to go to a ground offensive to change the equation on the ground, with all the risks and the costs that this entail, meaning getting maybe into a Lebanese quagmire again, as they have been for decades in the 80s and the 90s, or ultimately accept the ceasefire that the Americans are putting on the table? The problem is that I don't see so far Hezbollah budging, so I expect, and we can all expect, an increase, a sort of, let's say, escalated mode of action of Israel in Lebanon, maybe hitting persistently nervous centers in the country, not only Hezbollah, but maybe civilian infrastructure in Beirut. And then we will see how much Hezbollah can still react. And today it showed that its reaction is still possible. Of course, it's not completely intact, but it can also harm Israel in return.
Thank you very much, Director of the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy of the American University of Beirut, Professor Joseph Bahout. Well, let's talk more about some of the wider implications of this conflict on Lebanon's stability and indeed recovery. I'm joined by Dr. Roch-Antoine Mahana in the studio. He's the chapter president of the World Economic Association and former World Bank consultant. Sir, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
Look, as a Lebanese economics expert, what's your biggest concern for Lebanon at the moment?
It's strange because Lebanon, as you know, just in 2019 in October, just faced a financial and economic collapse. The whole economy, the financial system, the banking, which was actually concentrated by the political regime, central bank, and the banks as well. So it was a devastating. The currency devaluated more than 98%. Inflation actually, it was hugely. So they faced actually hyperinflation. And so this kind of crisis at this crossroad right now it's exacerbating that fragile economy. As we can see that Lebanon just started bouncing back last year through tourism, through the economy, the vitality of the Lebanese people, the tourism, the potential there. They started at least breathing with that. However, they're just coming up. Lebanon's GDP was $50 billion. Over the past 5 years, they lost to $20 billion. That's a huge, fall in that. Now, it's really exacerbating a fragile economy. Now we are expecting after this, and what actually concerns me and worries me the most is that when it's actually the instability and what happened in the summer, and it's dragging, that actually hurt tourism big time over the summer. So summer was actually, we started feeling and seeing that recession. We were expecting this year GDP to grow by 2%. Mm-hmm. However, it was actually turned out to be a negative 1 to 1.5%. Now with that crisis coming up, war on Lebanon being declared openly, and with that magnitude, we are expecting a contraction in the gross domestic product, in the size of the economy, 6 to 10%. And if that prolongs, and the way you are seeing Netanyahu now rejecting the ceasefire orchestrated internationally by the main powers, that means that there is an intention to go further and escalate that. If that escalates and takes much longer, you never know, we might reach 20 to 25% contraction in the GDP. That's one aspect in this. But at the same time, Rosanna, this is hurting not only the size of the economy. Of course, the most important, the human lives, the victims, the displaced. We have about 200,000 displaced people right now, and it's growing. The victims, among them children and women. The collateral damages, it's not about the military, what's happening, and this is priceless. Human lives is priceless. We cannot put an economic value on that. That said, you have different elements. Lebanon was on the brink of a huge collapse, and it's very fragile because it has a very rich fabric of different sects and denominations and religions, and its critical location should be an exemplary role model of that kind of stability and peace. If that actually becomes available, then the sky's the limit. However, right now, things are going backward big time. Tourism, take for instance tourism. Tourism last year, actually in 2023, it contributed to the economy by $5.4 billion. Right now, occupancy rate at the hotels, they're down to 10% only. The revenues, they actually dropped by 85%. If you look, and there's something important, the farmers and the people, and I'm talking not for one, it's across the country, the agricultural damage that happened. The phosphorus bombs right now hitting the southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, which are the core of the agriculture produce of Lebanon, and this is the main export, bringing foreign currency to the country, that have been devastated. We're estimating this between $2.5 to $4 billion until today. So that actually already, it's a huge bill. Healthcare, the healthcare actually sector, it's already very much stressed. With the Syrian refugees, you have 1.5 million. Right now, you have a different kind of displacement into specific areas coming from the south, from the Bekaa, the Mount of Lebanon and Beirut, that creating more stressful on the infrastructure, healthcare and infrastructure. It's costing billions. Nonetheless, you have to look at the direct cost of the damage that happened to the infrastructure, to the housing, to the displacement. That is a humanitarian crisis. You have also the cost on the trade. Trade right now is going to be definitely impacted because there is, all the airlines, all the supply chain channels, logistics, they're cut. And this is actually last year, imports were about $17.5 billion. Right now, they're definitely going to be negative. They're going to drop down. And that actually constitutes, because Lebanon, depends on that import for producing other products as well, whether in the raw material or other intermediary products and items, and that actually is going to be definitely affected. So we're talking about different sectors, let alone the inflation. Inflation was, like I said, hyperinflation over the past 5 years, and now we started seeing last year a kind of, the inflation started actually subsiding, started actually to be reduced, and now we are seeing it's going to bounce back. where inflation worldwide actually it started, dropping. Now with this crisis, it's going to go over 400% inflation. And sadly, so the monopolistic power in the country with those oligarchs and everything, few traders, they have the medicine, few of them, they have the steel necessities. Take an example right now, mattresses, which is a human need right now. They are sold at $10 a mattress to the Ministry of Health. They change their mind the next day to $20 and $30 a mattress. So there is a price hoarding. And that's actually that price gouging that's occurring because absence of rule of law. There is no central government to control. And
one example of many that can be picked out from the economic battering that Lebanon has taken. Look, it's been good to get your expertise this evening, Dr. Roch-Antoine Mahana. Thank you.
My pleasure.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, welcome back to W News. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken telling MSNBC earlier on today, quote, "The world is speaking clearly for virtually all of the key countries in Europe and in the region on the need for a ceasefire." He added he would be meeting with Israeli officials in New York later today. Well, in an Al Arabiya News interview with Hadley Gamble, former Lebanese MP Walid Jumblatt said this about Netanyahu's approach to US officials at the moment.
How telling was it that the attacks on Hezbollah came just one day after the U.S. representative was in Israel having meetings to calm the situation?
It means that they don't care about the U.S. representative. They just don't care. I mean, you're speaking about Hochstein.
Yes.
He doesn't care. The Israelis, Netanyahu, doesn't care about him. He dismisses any effort, although minimal, of U.S. administration to try to appease a little bit, to cool it down.
Well, let's talk a bit more now, shall we, about Israel's relations with the rest of the world, particularly one of its biggest allies, the United States. I'm joined in the studio, I'm pleased to say, by the President and Chief Correspondent of Feature Story News, Simon Marks, very familiar face to this channel. And look, Simon, you cover the US broadly as well as the rest of the world, but you're looking very much at the US election race at the moment. What is the state of the way Israel's playing into that and what's happening in the Middle East?
I think, Rosanna, it's got an outsized impact now on the American presidential race. I mean, that's been clear for several months because of the extent to which Arab American voters particularly, and many of them in crucial battleground states like Michigan, have taken issue with the Biden administration's handling of the situation in Gaza, the Biden-Harris administration's handling, as they always refer to the current American government, and Kamala Harris inherits that difficulty. Now, she says that there are going to be differences if she becomes president of the United States. She will not be silent, she says, in the face of the appalling level of civilian death that has taken place in Gaza, but we don't know what the specifics are of her policy towards the Middle East and how it may change from Joe Biden's policy, and that remains a problem for her with Arab American voters, traditionally a constituency that the Democrats have counted upon. If they stay home, they don't have to turn out for Donald Trump. They can just stay home. Very unlikely to turn out for Donald Trump, given his threats once again to close the country's borders to Muslim travellers from all over the world. If they stay home in a tightly contested election in battleground states, that's a big problem for the Democrats.
Let's talk for a moment about funding, because it's often a really kind of hot topic when it comes to people thinking about the US and its foreign policy. American voters, what do they want? How much money do they want to be giving to other countries? Because today, the White House announcing it's giving Ukraine, President Zelensky, another $8 billion in aid. And then within the last few hours, we've also learned from Israel saying it's secured $8.7 billion in US packages as well for its war efforts. How's all that going to go down?
Well, this is Joe Biden doubling down. He's got 115 days left in his presidency. We now know when he leaves the White House, and he's trying to get as much of this done as possible because they understand at the White House this is a very tightly contested election, and if Donald Trump comes back in, all of those policies in both Ukraine and the Middle East are susceptible to change. American voters, in large measure, those certainly backing Donald Trump, are attracted by his determination to return to something of an isolationist foreign policy and to avoid distant entanglements about which American voters know very little. Trump always says the Biden administration has been more concerned with Russia's border with Ukraine than it has been with America's border to the south with Mexico and the rest of Latin America. So there's no question that there are some voters out there that are going to be attracted to a message of not getting embroiled, as Trump says, wrapping up these conflicts in both the Middle East and Ukraine, he says, within one day of him returning to the White House, although, of course, he never explains how exactly he's going to do that.
Look, while we've got you, it would be remiss not to do another story out of the US today. I know it's caught your attention, which was a big Democrat hopeful. The mayor of New York City, his home's been raided.
Well, absolutely astonishing developments in New York City. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, who has been a growing problem for Democrats, has now made history. He is going to be the first sitting mayor of the Big Apple to face criminal charges. He's facing bribery and corruption charges. He's accused of taking $100,000 in illegal campaign contributions, many of them resulting in preferential treatment that he allegedly won at the hands of Turkish Airlines. And they raided the Gracie Mansion again today, even as they were bringing these indictments, because the FBI and the Department of Justice clearly thinks there may be more stuff to dig into. So for the Democrats, he is now suddenly a massive problem. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, has the power to remove him from office. She says she is trying to decide what to do. Democrats have got this scandal with Eric Adams in New York City. The Republicans have got a scandal with their lieutenant governor down in North Carolina, who, of course, CNN investigated and reported had placed all sorts of inflammatory comments on a pornographic website a decade ago. So both of these parties now looking at these two respective scandals and worrying about their potential impact on the presidential race.
Extraordinary stuff. Look, really good to get your view across all things US and where it stands in the rest of the world. President and Chief Correspondent, Feature Story News, Simon Marks.
Cheers, Rosanna.
Well, let's show you some pictures of that now, shall we? What Simon was just talking about there. New York's Mayor Eric Adams was federally charged Thursday with crimes including wire fraud, soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations and bribery conspiracy. The just unsealed indictment follows a sweeping probe into the mayor's campaign and his close associates on whether he conspired with Turkish government officials to receive illegal contributions in exchange for official acts. The search at Adams' residence, known as Gracie Mansion, began before dawn and is the latest shock twist in a graft investigation against the Adams administration. According to Associated Press, in a video speech released Wednesday night, Adams vowed to fight any charges against him, claiming he's been made a target in a case based on lies. Well, to some other international news now. China saying its launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile into the Pacific Ocean was legitimate and routine after the rare test prompted a regional outcry. Japan's government saying it was not given advance notice and expressing concern about China's military build-up. In Japan, the world's longest-serving death row prisoner has been acquitted after 46 years. A court overturning a murder conviction on fabricated evidence for 88-year-old former boxer Iwao Hakamada, who was too frail to hear his acquittal in court. Kenya will deploy additional police officers to Haiti to help the government there fight armed gangs, aiming to have 2,500 officers there by January. President William Ruto making the commitment during his address at the UN General Assembly. Enter some business news now. China plans to issue special sovereign bonds worth about $284 billion this year as part of fresh fiscal stimulus. Meanwhile, AFP reporting China's President Xi Jinping has admitted the country is facing new economic problems and pledged to ramp up employment and fix its troubled property sector. Meanwhile, the IMF's approved a $7 billion loan program for Pakistan with an immediate disbursement of around $1 billion. Pakistan's been struggling to stabilise its economy, leading to 22 bailouts since 1958 and is currently the IMF's fifth largest debtor. And the US economy front and centre with less than 40 days to go until the presidential election. Fresh data showing the country's GDP growth was 2.9% for 2023, up from a previously estimated 2.5%, thanks to a jump in consumer spending, among other factors. And the latest in an ongoing spat between the current UK government and Elon Musk. The tech billionaire sniping back online after learning he's not invited to an upcoming investment summit being hosted by Prime Minister Keir Starmer next month. Let's get a reminder now of our top stories. More strikes on Beirut as Benjamin Netanyahu rejects calls for a ceasefire and tells Israel's military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. US State Secretary Antony Blinken saying the world agrees on the need for a ceasefire ahead of meeting Israeli officials in New York. And Ukraine's President Zelensky thanking the White House for a further $8 billion in aid, rounding off his trip stateside. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burges Watson for Global News Today with special guest Lebanon's ambassador to the UK, Rami Mortada.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on the Rizkan Show for empowering conversation.
Walid, thank you so much for joining me. I want to kick off by asking you to tell us how you see the situation in Lebanon today.
I hope it won't be an endless war like the war that started in Gaza and then in the West Bank, Lebanon. I hope so, but I have no clues. Unless we imagine a political solution. The political solution is, according to me, to try to go back to the armistice truce agreement, armistice signed in 1949 by the Lebanese state through UN with the Israeli state, 1949, which established regulations of no war but no peace.
Yeah.
I hope so, but
Does that mean that you advocate for a normalization of relations with Israel?
no, we had our relationship during decades was we are in state of war, not state of peace, but how should I say, a truce, not active war.
Yes.
A truce.
But in order for diplomatic efforts to take place,
Yes.
there'll have to be some kind of normalization, no?
No, but you have to. You've got to have a UN, effective UN, working. Now the UN after Gaza is paralyzed. Okay, we count on whom? Who is the arbiter? Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody. And who can stop Netanyahu? The US? Maybe, I don't know.
How telling was it that the attacks on Hezbollah came just one day after the U.S. representative was in Israel having meetings to calm the situation?
It means that they don't care about the U.S. representative. They just don't care. I mean, you're speaking about Hochstein.
Yes.
He doesn't care. The Israelis, Netanyahu, doesn't care about him. He dismisses any effort, although minimal, of U.S. administration to try to appease a little bit, to cool it down.
Who does this situation benefit?
He said, Netanyahu, that's the whole issue now. He said that he is willing to change the whole Middle Eastern order. What does it mean? That's the question. And he's now planning a whole scheme for the Middle East, replacing the old scheme that was established by, how should I say, starting Balfour, starting Sykes-Picot. Now Netanyahu wants a new scheme.
Like new friends?
No. Wars everywhere that could end up in, maybe, I hope not, total chaos of the area.
Yeah. When you think of what happened on October 7th and the aftermath, in your mind, was it a mistake for Hamas to attack Israel?
Look, to be frank with you, I supported the Hamas action.
On October 7th?
Yes, yes. And I was criticized by many ambassadors, amongst them the American ambassador. Okay. But the people of Gaza, 60% of the people of Gaza are refugees from Palestine of 1948. And the settlements that were attacked, plus the lies, you know, remember the lies that, well, children were beheaded, and it proved to be a lie. But this land is for them inside, imprisoned for the last 76 years, is their land. Now, did anybody, Hezbollah, Hamas, the international opinion, the international world, predicted that this war will be endless? I don't know.
In light of that, was it a mistake, given what we're seeing on the ground today and what's coming now to Lebanon?
Easy to say it was a mistake. No, easy.
Yeah.
I don't. After all, you have Palestinian people. I mean, erasing them from the map, like what is now being done in Gaza. Later on, trying to force them to emigrate towards the East Bank. And King Abdullah made a very brilliant speech at the UN. Somebody's listening? I don't know.
Yeah.
Lebanon, well, the question is now if Netanyahu will use the same, he's already using the same, that, well, I want to erase Hamas. Now he's using the same rhetoric as for Hezbollah.
Yeah. Over the years covering Lebanon, I've often heard from various groups that they would welcome Israeli action to take out Hezbollah.
Okay, but I mean, also over the years, we have a decade or 2 decades of Israeli occupation of the south of Lebanon. We have in 1982, the Israelis came to West Beirut, invaded Beirut. Then they withdrew. So let's I hope they will reconsider local parties, reconsider past experiences, and even Netanyahu reconsider invading part of south of Lebanon. Part, I said, I don't know where, but part. He's saying that, or his defense minister is saying that.
Yeah.
Gala.
What is Hassan Nasrallah's next move?
Next move, he will just he stick to his policy by answering back, trying to hurt Israel. Up till now, he sticks to his policy where he was precise in one of his interviews, the last one, that, well, I will stick to hit military bases, which is justified maybe. But I mean, in war, any mistake can happen from both sides. Mm-hmm. Plus the fact that the Israelis are not only hitting military targets, hitting anything. Now you have 500,000 Lebanese displaced.
Yeah. Tell me this, Hassan Nasrallah's plan or strategy, as you say, do you believe he still gets his orders directly from Tehran?
I don't see him distancing himself from the Iran, and I don't buy this policy that the Iranians have dropped him.
So Iran hasn't abandoned Hezbollah, in your mind? With that being said, what happens next? Because it seems as if Mr. Netanyahu is not going to hold back.
At the same time, although the blows were terribly hard, losing high-rank allies or officers, okay, but it's not easy also to see that, well, again, for the third time or fourth time, I don't remember now, the whole population of the south are being displaced to go to where?
Yeah. Tell me this, how much has Hezbollah's capacity to do damage been degraded?
I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not a military expert. I have no idea.
But we've seen
the excuse, the official excuse of the Israelis, they want to bring back the citizens to the northern part of Israel, to the settlements and to the cities. Okay, we can say the same thing. Also, we want to bring back, they were 100,000, now they are 500,000. Yeah. Our citizens to the south of Lebanon. This precludes an agreement via the United Nations. Truce agreement or ceasefire or 1701.
Yeah. Who can push the Israelis to that kind of agreement? Because you're saying that the United States has no leverage.
They should have, but they have no. They don't want. They don't want. Now the main concern is the electoral race, and blood is becoming. The hundreds of thousands of casualties are being massacred here.
Yes. So the United States that's obsessed with the presidential race is of no help in this situation.
The United States, the so-called international community, but this whole international community is just paralyzed because the UN is paralyzed.
Yeah. And that works for whom? To have a paralyzed UN?
Well, he has a free hand. Mr. Netanyahu and his people have a free hand on the area.
Yeah. Tell me this. When you think about what happens next, is there any party in Lebanon or any leader in Lebanon who you see powerful enough to effect a kind of truce with Israel?
We have to work on that. I don't see any party now betting on Israel. But we are divided, of course. We have to work on the minimum of national unity and be able, maybe through the French envoy, Le Drian, to elect a president, because we need a president. We cannot stay like that with a caretaker prime minister and this void in administration.
What needs to happen in order for Lebanon to get
we
there?
We need to elect a president without preconditions, a consensus president, adequate one, good one, to be able to represent Lebanon officially everywhere.
Yeah.
And to take care of the country.
Yeah. Do you think that we need to see a much younger political class?
Well, much younger political class. Now it's, do we have time now to look at a much younger or older?
Well, they did the same thing in the United States, and now we see what we see. The president deciding halfway into the campaign that he's not going to be able to continue it. So there is an argument for having younger people in office,
okay,
no?
Okay, but now I think it's a trivial issue. In the United States, be it a younger or an older, it doesn't change anything. The machine there is totally different, whereby you have interest groups, financial groups controlling the real power there.
Yeah. What does this mean in your mind for Lebanon today in terms of that election? Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Is one going to be better than the other for Lebanon?
I don't see any change for us, or for the Middle East, or for the Palestinians, because we've seen their past rhetoric. Once Kamala Harris, once she mentioned the necessity of having a two-state solution, Okay, but I mean, the two-state solution is becoming a joke. Why? Because where is this Palestinian state will be erected, will be placed? In the West Bank, you have 800,000 settlers there. Who is going to displace or tell them, go back to home? This area is our area. This territory is our territory, Palestine.
Yeah. What about the United States, the United Kingdom, all the Western powers who have warned their citizens about evacuating, about leaving Lebanon, while at the same time, at least in the case of the United States, continuing to support Israel's war machine with billions and billions worth of weapons?
They care about the safety of their citizens. They don't care about us.
Are they hypocrites?
Yes. They care about the citizens, of the safety of the citizens. Where is the active action of the United States, United Kingdom, or others? I mean, even also the Russians said the same thing, but the Russians are becoming, how should I say, not powerless, but not effective in Lebanon or the Middle East because of the war in Ukraine.
Was that war a mistake in your mind?
Maybe he was dragged to this war, Putin. Maybe because he thought at the beginning that, well, the Ukrainian regime will collapse. It didn't collapse because there was preparation for this trap years ago.
Yeah. So you think he was misinformed?
I think so. Somebody, I mean, all great leaders are sometimes misinformed.
Yeah. And you think he's a great leader?
A great leader, I'm saying that not in the sense of being great. I'm big leader, sorry.
Yeah.
Big leaders. Okay.
Who's
a great leader now?
Anybody?
No.
No.
The area of big leaders like Charles de Gaulle, maybe Kennedy, maybe. But even Kennedy fall in the trap of the Tonkin affair.
Bay of Tonkin.
Right.
Tell me this. There have been lots of talk about China getting somehow involved. Do you see that as something that's realistic?
Do you see Chinese military bases in the Middle East? The Middle East is surrounded, invaded by American bases everywhere.
Yeah.
They have one small one, I think, in Djibouti. That's it.
But China's been instrumental in certain deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran, elsewhere. They have shown that they can be an interlocutor. Is that something you see ever happening in this case?
No, I've seen they were instrumental in trying to cool down the war of Yemen, Saudi Arabia. That's it. And they have succeeded,
yeah,
in a way.
Again, back to Hezbollah and their capacity to wage war. Are they in a better position than they were in 2006?
Can't tell you. I don't know. Who knows?
What's your sense?
They are still there. They are still there. Okay, but I mean, they have suffered great casualties, but they're still there.
Yeah. Still dangerous.
I mean, this is also from your point of view, they are dangerous. From some Lebanese point of view, they are not dangerous. They are defending Lebanon. So it's subject to discussion.
I don't have a point of view. I'm a journalist.
Sorry?
I don't have a point of view.
No, I'm just answering you. You said dangerous. I'm saying for some Lebanese, it's a little bit different.
Talk to me about what happens next. You say that this is a country that needs a president. This is a country that needs some kind of truce,
yes,
with Israel. And also this is a country, frankly, that you and I have discussed this many times, is in the midst still of an economic crisis.
Yes. Okay, but I mean, let's go back to priorities. Re-establish the truce of 1949 that regulated the relations between the State of Israel and the State of Lebanon. 1949. I think it's still valid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that something that the Prime Minister is working on?
He can't do it on his own if he's not supported unanimously by all the parties of Lebanon, and he can't do it without the election of a president. He should be part of the complete administration, legally speaking and officially.
So everything that's been happening has put again a major strain on Lebanon's resources. Walk me through the humanitarian effort that needs to happen now.
We need mattresses, we need medicine, clean water, What else? We need space to host. Of course, you have the schools, but you have to equip the schools to host tens of thousands of displaced people. We need international help in this field. Yes, we need international help because we cannot expect any international help except maybe in this field.
Yes.
Maybe.
So we're talking about specifically World Food Program.
World Food Program, yes.
Yeah. And they've been in contact. They are moving, or?
They are moving slowly. But I mean, also the war is not moving slowly. The war is moving rapidly.
Yes.
It's a race against time.
Yes.
Race with time.
And given where we are today in terms of the economic crisis, Riyad Salameh.
I mean, the economic crisis happened. People were bankrupt totally, public sector. People, thanks to the non-establishment of the capital control, non-appliance of the capital control required to safeguard the economy, well, people got rich, terribly rich. So it's not the issue now. Who's going now to apply the regulations of the IMF? Nobody. Now it's war.
Yes. And who is at fault in your mind?
Everybody.
Every party, every leader?
Everybody. It's an old, long story, everybody, because nobody can say, I'm not responsible. Everybody will accuse the other. So let's say anybody will accuse the other side. Let's say anybody. That's it.
Talk to me about that level of fault. Do you feel a sense of guilt at all for your role in Lebanon's past?
Well, we are, Lebanon, it's composed of sects, of confessions, of clans, of power groups, okay? And this has been going on for decades, maybe a century. Okay? Some people, some Western embassies with local people thought, well, they might bring a new class, political class. Well, bringing a new political class to power without abolishing confessionalism lead to nowhere.
Yes.
We're still in the same vicious circle.
Do you see the last century and the beginning of this one as Lebanon as a failed experiment?
Let's now go back to the realities. The war, as if it's a destiny for the Lebanese every decade or more, 20 years, to have a new war. And now this war might be, without a political solution, might be endless. Yeah. So let's go back to war. The necessity of
But without
surviving.
A functioning state.
We still can function.
So the dysfunction continues to be functional.
Yes.
That can't be good enough. It's certainly failing people today.
We have to work on the ground, the available means that we have on the ground, waiting for maybe international aid in humanitarian aid. But
this is why everyone leaves. Because they have no hope that the political class will change, that the situation with Israel will change, the economic situation. That's why everybody leaves. I mean, what's the message to young people? Why would they stay?
I have no message now. My main concern is how to be able to host adequately the refugees of the south part of Lebanon or of Lebanon. I have no other message. I mean, I don't have the time now to think about what you're asking. Sorry.
And you're thinking about people here?
People here, how to survive, okay? Because people are, I'm sitting here in my apartment still, but I mean, other people they have lost their homes.
Yes.
They have lost everything. How to give them an adequate answer for their security, for their basic security.
Yes, and in the past you've had the help of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Gulf countries.
2006, yes. But in the past, the war was 33 or 34 days. Now it's almost a year.
Yeah. And the Gulf aid, do you anticipate it will come back to Lebanon?
I hope so. I don't know.
Yeah. That kind of aid usually comes with strings attached and demands.
No.
Progress.
In Qatar in 2006, there was no conditions. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, well.
So you want aid from the Gulf?
Plus, I mean, the Iranians helped us, helped Hezbollah. Okay, but at that time they had money. No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Final question. Benjamin Netanyahu. There are some who say that this is just another ploy to stay in power. How do you view him?
I don't share your opinion that, well, he's in trouble. And even if he's in trouble, he doesn't care. He has the majority of the Israelis backing him. It reminds me of the conquer of Judea and Samaria at the time of the prophet Samuel. He said it somewhere. He mentioned Samuel somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is why I read part of the Bible. I said part. And I'm listening to conferences on the Bible. Strangely enough, we are back to 2,000 years ago.
Biblical times.
Yes.
Walid, thank you so much for joining me.
Please.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
Guangzhou. When in China, visit Guangzhou. Guangzhou was once called Canton. It is the capital of Guangdong province and is the host venue for the busy Canton Fair. Thousands of tourists visit the city for a number of reasons: the wonderful scenery, the local culture, and the authentic cuisine. The Pearl River, the third longest river in China, is certainly a breathtaking view. The Nansha Wetland Park is a great relaxing place to experience the natural beauty of Guangzhou. Nansha serves as the best habitat for fish, shrimps, and crabs to thrive. For a glimpse of fascinating architecture, head to the Shamian Island. With amazing buildings and structures alongside cutting-edge works of art, you'll definitely appreciate the diverse yet marvelous design. There's also the Chen Clan Academy, which boasts of the traditional Guangdong architecture. It features one of the best preserved ancestral halls, representing the fascinating folk art of southern China. In the middle of the city, find the Sacred Heart Cathedral on Yaid Road, facing the Pearl River. It's quite amazing to find such a place amid the old busy city and noisy surroundings. For a dose of entertainment, catch a classic Cantonese opera while in Guangzhou. The best traditional performances are usually held in the Jiangnan Theater in Haizhu District. When it comes to food, China's 8 regional dishes is well represented in Guangzhou. Their food is known for its tender and slightly sweet taste. You must try Guangzhou's authentic dim sum or have morning tea time with friends and family. Guangzhou has a lot to offer shoppers too. The Canton Fair is the largest trade fair in China, selling a wide variety of goods. Find health products, computer accessories, and garments at the fair and at reasonable prices. You may also find services to help you book hotel or travel requirements here. Another must-see shopping street is the Jiangnan Avenue North, located at the approach bridge of Haizhu Bridge. The street is full of wedding dress shops. Every time the bus passes by this wedding dress street, girls wish that the bus could slow down so they can get a better view of the dresses on display.
But we start with Afghanistan, which recently marked 3 years under Taliban rule after the US and its Western allies pulled troops out of the country as the Afghan government's army crumbled. It was a chaotic departure which sparked desperate scenes at Kabul airport as thousands of Afghans fled what they feared would be persecution by the Taliban. Millions more joined the exodus abroad, while a further 3 million people remain displaced internally. Most of these are women. Well, despite initial promises of fair treatment by the Taliban rulers, the erosion of women's freedoms has progressed from curbing education to encompass almost all aspects of their everyday lives. The latest decree requires women to be completely covered and accompanied by a male family member when outside the home, and their voices must not be heard. No reading allowed, no reciting poetry, and definitely no singing. Well, critical voices in the international community have accused the Taliban's policies as amounting to gender apartheid. But the Taliban have rebuffed such attacks, defending the new rules as necessary to promote virtue and deter vice, and maintaining that the new laws are based on Islamic teaching. All of which leaves us with some essential questions. What is the best future women can expect within Afghanistan? Were the Western powers naive to believe women's rights would be protected by the Taliban, or were they resigned to sacrifice those freedoms when they withdrew their forces? Is the international community powerless to influence the Taliban's stance on women? What are Islamic leaders around the world saying about the issue? Is it arrogance to even try to interfere with the Taliban system of government? And what is the likelihood of Afghan men and women uniting to oppose the restrictions? Well, I'll be joined today by two women who know this subject inside out. Later, I'll be speaking with one of the United Nations' most influential voices on discrimination against women and girls. But first up is Shukriya Barakzai, a former Afghan ambassador and member of parliament who was attacked for her views supporting women and forced to flee her country. She joins me from London, where she's a member of the Afghan Women Coalition for Change. Shukriya, thank you for joining me. Now, in order to understand how life has changed for women in Afghanistan since the return of the Taliban 3 years ago, let's start by talking about the freedoms which existed in the 2 decades between Taliban rule. Tell me about some of those freedoms and how was life for a young woman or girl with hopes and dreams for the future at that time?
Well, thank you, Mr. Reza. Life has been dramatically changed in the past 3 years for women in Afghanistan. You may not believe, and from 2001 till 21, the journey of Afghan women the achievement was tremendous. We had women, more than 30%, in the government administration body as a civil servant. Beside of that, women as ambassador, as a governor, as a mayor, as a minister, as advisor, as those whom they are leading very high in key position, such as Independent Human Rights Commission in the government of Afghanistan. When I say members of parliament, they all were been elected member by the people of Afghanistan. We had freedom of expression. We had saved equal rights through the constitution. But where we are today, who we are now, is just, we are not even existing according to the law that has been imposed on us in the past 3 years. Even we don't have the right to go to school beyond year 6 or grade 6.
I will touch on some of those in a moment, but you pointed out how prominent the roles were for some of the women in that period without the Taliban controlling the country. Yourself, for example, were a member of parliament. You were also an ambassador. How much did your life change then?
It's very difficult. God forbid, I hope no one will taste or be through such a journey that I was. Being a member of parliament, being a prominent journalist, and being someone to feel and proud about your country, and being ambassador and diplomat, and today dropping level down, living in exile without any identity. Those women we trained in Afghanistan in the past 20 years for leadership. Unfortunately, today those projects was been shifted. We have to teach them how to make the clothes and how to cook, how to bake. This is the real change which is in the 21st century happening in Afghanistan.
So let's go through some of those decrees that have come into place most recently and the impact they're having.
The voice, face and body of women are not anymore our own property. So by those decrees and by such a restriction rules, they're really eliminating the self-confidence among women. So right now, women in Afghanistan, we are not the second citizen, we are not a third citizen, we are not a citizen at all. We are not counting as a human being. You know, when they put on you, just because of your gender, just because you're women, you can't do nothing. You cannot go out of the house. You cannot go to public park. You cannot, you must cover entire your face, your body, even your voice. Can you imagine? There's any Islamic country in the earth are practicing such a things?
Yeah, let me ask you then, Ms. Shukriya, so you, as you're indicating, you're not even supposed to be doing this. If you're in Afghanistan, you would be punished. What would be the punishments for such violations, and how are they enforced?
Well, surprisingly, those punishments needs to be chosen by individuals. It's depend from the voice of virtual soldiers whom you are facing. It could be beating you and lashing you by 100 type of lashes, whips they are putting according to their Islamic rules. In a public place, they can put you in a jail, which is, I'm sure you're aware how the situation are. These unlaw arresting include tortures, include rapes, include mental and physical illness, which is women are living at the moment. So unfortunately, even they don't put a proper kind of punishment. Every individual can take step in action against you, including the taxi driver, which will be avoiding to take you because when you don't have a male chaperone with you or mahram.
You know, I hope to get a chance to speak with the Taliban's representatives to get an idea for what the reasons are. But what do you see as the Taliban's justification for these measures?
There's no justification. Simply, always what they have answered, they say, this is according to rules and principles in Afghan custom, and particularly they are highlighting the Sharia law. But the Sharia, the Islam, is not only a special Islam for Afghanistan. The Prophet Muhammad didn't send a different chapter of Holy Quran to the people of Afghanistan to be divided by the rest of the Muslim world.
When it comes to covering up completely, why is the responsibility put on women as possible temptresses? It basically suggests that men are weak-willed, doesn't it?
Worse, because according to Islam, first of all, you have to have control on yourself. It is self-confidence should come from men. But it's not only face now, it's also the voice of women. So it's not like men are going to be irritated by the physics of women, by the face. Even their voice could bring something to the women, according to Taliban interpretation. But this is not, would you believe that? It might happen? Why the women of Afghanistan should pay all the cost for such a weak government and men in Afghanistan? Why we should put ourselves in a jail, in a cage with the all cover, even we were not able to breathe oxygen properly, just because of sick of the men? They don't have control on their sexual desire? I think this is the most ridiculous justification they are bringing. But I strongly believe they have a fear, because when women get in power, they will see a different Afghanistan.
So Ms. Shukriya, let me ask you then, in general, apart from the Taliban and their own supporters, how many people support what's happening, and how much do men speak out in support of their wives, their daughters and mothers?
Well, there are men activists, which is they've been putting in jail. Why? Because he was campaigning for girls' education. There are men which is they are punishing because their female member family are standing for the rights of women to be educated, for their own rights. But at the meantime, I have to admit that the men in Afghanistan, if they are not standing with us, it doesn't mean they are accepting what is the rule of Taliban today, because in Afghanistan, men also don't have the rights. Having a bear, it's a compulsory.
Let me ask you, as an advocate of women's rights, you were attacked for your views. Describe what you went through.
Oh, I've been through so many things in my entire life, because I was against, and still I'm against warlordism. I'm against this fanatics of explanation of Islam in my country. I'm against all those kind of occupation which was been imposed on the people of Afghanistan. I lost my 2 kids during the civil war in Afghanistan. More than 8 times they were suicide, including suicide attacked on me, but that miraculously I survived. So this is not an individual. If you see in the social media, they label me from head to toes, but I never give up, because this is not the situation. How we've been through the difficult time, the tough time, the challenge made us to be ourselves. It developed, it bring me more self-confident. When first I was being lashed by the Taliban in front of hundreds of people, that was 1997. When I stood up, I become a different person. I become the founder of a homeschool in Afghanistan, and I continue my journey till now.
Now, of course, there's been criticism of the Western allies who essentially just left the country in the hands of the Taliban. Do you feel they were taken in by the Taliban's promises at that time that women would be treated fairly, or do you think that the Western allies simply were willing to sacrifice the plight of women due to the political pressures they felt at home to bring back their armed forces after years of fighting, obviously, with the Taliban and suffering so many casualties?
Well, allow me first to declare one thing. First, exit with dignity was possible for Western allies to leave Afghanistan. Second, they shouldn't impose on us a fake process under the name of peace process. Third, they shouldn't sign such a shameful document in Doha with the Taliban on 29 February 2020. So these 3 things may not happen. If they could avoid these 3, we may not be in a miserable situation as we are today. The people of Afghanistan was feeling we've been badly betrayed by our Western allies. But today they are not even themselves accountable, although they bring in power the Taliban, because the Taliban was fight for 20 years. They weren't able to control even one district. How come, and within a 1 year time after Doha agreement and after the agreement between US and Taliban, they seized power, they took over the entire country, the power. But I also like to say it's also the duty of Afghans. We need to wake up. We shouldn't sacrifice our life anymore for Western or Eastern values. We should stick what is our geography, what's our culture, what's our religion, and we should stand up on our own feet. Shouldn't let anyone to lead us.
Let me ask you, do you expect another exodus following these new limitations imposed by the Taliban? And do you feel that there's also the chance that some countries will be less welcoming to Afghan refugees than they were, say, 3 years ago?
Well, nowadays, you heard about the deportation from Germany. Afghans was been deported from Germany to Kabul, Afghanistan, without any protocol between the 2 states. On the other hand, the borders are been shut down because of the behavior of Taliban and etc. And this is in the history of Afghanistan. In the past 3 years, 8 million Afghans left their houses. But still there are some doors open. But for how many years Afghans should be refugees and refuge to other countries? And the refuge country, the host country behavior also towards Afghanistan is getting worse and worse day by day. So this is the civilian of Afghanistan. This is the ordinary people of Afghanistan are paying that price.
And thinking about how countries receive Afghan refugees and so on, you're living in the UK, and I'm wondering, what were your thoughts during the recent riots by right-wing groups against refugees recently?
It's very sad. It's very sad. This is, I think, those whom they come teach us what's human rights, what's value of human being, and everyone is quite equal in their society. There's a freedom of expression, freedom of religion, those things. These are kind of slogan for Western and those kind of soft weapon to be used against other. Well, still, I am not complaining. Still, I'm just a resident in the United Kingdom. But to be honest, there is a discrimination that it's quite loudly shouting. There's a gender, there's a race, and there's religion discrimination. And that kind of right wing is not only in the United Kingdom, it's going to be occupied entire Europe. And that's a big alert. We are standing, West in particular, against those values that they impose those ideas on top of everyone. And the today war, why we are refugee, why Syrian, Iraqis, Afghans are refugee, because of those war was being imposed by them to our country.
Now, while Western leaders have been criticised for failing Afghan women, what's been the response of Islamic leaders around the world? What would you expect in terms of action from progressive Muslim countries in terms of putting pressure on the Taliban?
Well, just recently, OIC, Islamic Country Organization, hosted a meeting, and they invite the Foreign Ministry of Taliban there. He was not officially on the picture, but he was filling the seats of Afghanistan. I haven't seen any, in the past 3 years, strong action from the Islamic countries towards Taliban. It seems to me Taliban are the type of monsters that everyone don't like to stand against or beat. They are the type of monster that everyone likes to have with them and use against another one. And this is, I believe, that unity among Muslim globally, but particularly among Islamic countries, are very essential. It's the time that we have to be united for the sake of our own religion, for just being human, for the order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala order us to do good and to live in peace and to respect and to live with harmony with each other.
I know the Taliban's response to criticism of their policies is to basically demand respect for the way they govern their country, which they say is based on Islamic law. And there is an argument that no other country would welcome such outside interference. So don't they have a point in some ways?
Is that outside interference? When they are eliminating the half of population from being a citizen, is that outside interference, which is the Islamic State of Afghanistan, which is not state, the Emirates of Taliban, don't have any kind of written definition legally whom they are without constitution, how they can introduce themselves to the world, how they like to build a relationship with other countries where they are facing the lack of simple contract between state and citizens, between themselves and the entire globe. I think it's not a kind of outsider.
So let me ask you then, Mr. Shukriya, in your opinion, what impact is it having on Afghanistan's economy to have women pretty much removed from the mainstream workforce?
The women contribution in Afghanistan economy was tremendous. More than 45% of our economy was with the hands of Afghan women. It's such a shame to see even women where they are leading a non-governmental organization or companies, forcefully, they have to drop their name and they should put either a male or their male family member's name on top of that, as a CEO, as a director. When it comes to the women, don't be surprised if Afghanistan will be lacking the medical doctor in the coming years. A female doctor will not be anymore there, not a female journalist, not a female engineer, not a female entrepreneurs. So this is how the contribution of economy is not only coming by men. Every society, every country, every bird needs to fly with two wings. With one wing, no one can fly. And today, the Taliban likes Afghanistan to fly with one wing. It's impossible. That's why we can see the backlash. That's why we can see the poverty. More than 20 million people live below poverty line. And if you see the situation of Afghan women, particularly when the Taliban cut their salary just to 5,000 AFs per month, and that's like $75 per month for those women, which is they are in charge of their entire family nafaqah. I mean, like they're in charge of their family rent, house, food, electricity and everything. It's impossible to survive with that.
You know, we've seen in recent days women both within and outside Afghanistan post videos on social media defying the new rules by singing. Well, Mashukra, outsiders might be surprised to know that the internet and social media is widespread in Afghanistan. Why do you think the Taliban permits it?
Well, the Taliban already banned few famous social media platforms in Afghanistan. And the Taliban also arresting those people that they are active in a social media inside of Afghanistan. What technique we are using? They are sending posted to us, and we are sharing with the media, with the social media outside of Afghanistan, just for the sake of their safety. But I will not be surprised if soon Taliban will put some restriction even for the internet access, and that would be a big disaster, because that will damage the online education, which is most of the women are taking. We are trying to deliver education online. It's not really going to be replace the proper education system, but this is how we can do today. If the Taliban will go and order that one, that will be another disaster and another bad chapter for Afghanistan and women in Afghanistan in particular.
How do you see the direction of travel with this issue? Is there any prospect for a popular resistance within the country, or with boys being taught this new reality in Taliban religious schools, should we all just be resigned to a generation of women being increasingly subjugated by Afghanistan or in Afghanistan?
The resistance of the people of Afghanistan, you may see very soon, because that frustration will not going to be acceptable by anyone in Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan, they believe the international community, because they say Taliban changed. They are good boys. They will not do bad things have they done in the past. But when they seized power, they showed they are even worse than before. But I think now people are realizing, now the people are standing against them. Now they are losing their own commanders. Now you can see division among the Taliban leadership. One saying school needs to be open, another say no. So these kind of things are showing somehow a type of different messages from such a totalitarian regime where they speak in one voice. But now those different voices are kind of also resistant groups shaping even inside of the Taliban.
Yes, perhaps cracks in the system. Now, you've touched on it on a number of factors, but what do you say is the greatest loss to the country that's posed by the treatment of women in Afghanistan?
This is a great loss. We lost Afghanistan. We lost our achievement. We lost who we were. We lost our dignity. We lost our contribution in our society with this entire world. It's not, the change of government from the republic to the Taliban for some people is just change of faces, but it was a great loss of Afghanistan. The history, the pride, the position, the hopes, the dreams for generations.
So listen, Shukriya Barakzai, I do hope to have a chance to chat with you again. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Tokyo, the world's most populous metropolitan area with 35 million people and one of the most expensive cities, Greater Tokyo. For its crowded places and high cost of living, what makes Tokyo worth a visit? The city is teeming with history, culture, and sights. One of the most popular is the Hachiko statue, a tribute to the dog loyal to his master. Hachiko, who died of a heart infection in 1935, is regarded a national celebrity and has a bronze statue of him outside Shibuya Station in his honor. A lesser-known Disneyland also lies in Tokyo. It first opened in 1983 and would see over 13 million visitors per year, making it the third most popular theme park in the world. Also find the animation studio of Studio Ghibli Inc., often referred to as the Japanese Disney. The studio's Oscar-winning feature Spirited Away is the highest-grossing film in Japanese history. Another frequently visited site is the Imperial Palace. The palace became the official imperial residence in 1869. It remains the main residence of Japanese Emperor Akihito. For historic Shinto sites, most recommended is the Meiji Shrine in Shibuya. Shinto is Japan's dominant religion. It means the worship of the deities of heaven and earth. The Meiji Shrine is the most highly regarded of all and is an immaculate example of Japan's impressive architecture. Sporting events are also popular in Japan. The Tokyo Dome is a 55,000-seater all-weather multi-purpose home of Japan's most famous team, the Tokyo Tomiuri Giants. All over the world, Japanese food is very popular. Japanese fare is favored by many because of their incredible cooking and attention to precision and preparation. The place keeps their menu simple and delicious and is visited again and again because of its classic tonkatsu, cutlets of tender breaded pork slow-cooked to perfection. When it comes to shopping, many visit Tokyo for its haven of electronics and gadgets. For Japanese fashion, visit the hip, edgier Harajuku district. Here, you'll bump into younger individuals cosplaying or adults dressed in very clean minimalist styles.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective. Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every single weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up on the programme. Lebanon welcomes the diplomatic initiative of France and the United States as those countries put forward a ceasefire proposal, but Israel instructs its military to fight on with full force. Lebanese officials say at least 23 people, mostly women and children, have been killed after an Israeli airstrike hit a building in northeastern Lebanon, as Israel says it hit 75 Hezbollah targets overnight. Hezbollah says it has bombed military industry complexes using salvos of rockets aiming at sites in northern Israel. And as Netanyahu arrives in New York as he prepares to address the United Nations Assembly on Friday. Warm welcome to our programme. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the military to continue operations in Lebanon with full force. That is despite calls for a 21-day ceasefire from the US, the UK and other allies. Well, this comes as the Israeli military reports striking approximately 75 Hezbollah targets overnight in the south of Lebanon and in the Bekaa Valley. Well, the Lebanese Health Ministry is reporting at least 13 fatalities from those strikes, bringing the number of people killed since Monday to more than 600. And today, Israel has been targeting the Beirut suburbs in a fresh wave of strikes. Well, for reaction to the latest diplomatic developments and for more analysis on where Lebanon could be heading to from here, I'm joined by Lebanon's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Rami Mortada. Your Excellency, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. I'd just like to ask you, first of all, for your reaction to the news that a ceasefire doesn't look like it's going to be happening.
Well, that's really unfortunate, facing this tragic and horrific ongoing Israeli military operation over Lebanon, carpet bombing throughout the country. And now the most recent strike is in the suburbs of Beirut. So we really hoped that last night that this document that was presented by international partners would offer a glimpse of hope. And we welcome any effort to secure a ceasefire and any effort to secure the implementation of Security Council resolutions in the region. However, what we saw today in Israel are successive statements coming out of different levels in the hierarchy, rejecting this offer. So we're still hoping for extensive efforts being deployed, and I think Israeli position currently puts it in confrontation with the international community, which has spoken yesterday very loudly.
Indeed, but I mean, if we look at Western intervention and the effect that that's having, which is more or less no impact at this particular stage, and, you know, the United States has been trying to broker ceasefires in Gaza for the last 10 months and hasn't managed to do that either. So if Israel doesn't listen to the United States, who is Israel going to listen to?
Well, I think all the levers that exist to influence Israeli behavior should be used, because what's at stake here is regional stability. It's not only about Lebanon, although Lebanon is in a horrific situation and sustaining the most bloody and violent military attack. But it's not only about Lebanon. What's at stake is regional stability. The world has on its conscience Gaza, the ongoing war now for a year in Gaza. We don't want Lebanon to become the second Gaza, with all the ramifications that add up in the region and beyond.
Is your understanding that were a ceasefire to be presented to Hezbollah, that they would accept it?
Well, we've said that we would be looking to the Israeli reaction to that. And we've always said, Lebanon has always said that we want a diplomatic solution to this current standoff. However, Israel had a different outlook. And here we are, we're witnessing this race to the bottom. We have a warmongering Israeli government that has chosen war as a path forward. And I think now that the international community has spoken through this a joint statement yesterday, I think they should put effort behind what they've said in the document and make sure that it is implemented.
And all the while, Israel saying it wants to completely destroy Hezbollah. Is that realistic? I mean, what's your reaction to a statement like that?
Well, we're used to unrealistic war aims that Israel has been now defining for a year. We've seen bringing the hostages back in Gaza. Where are the hostages today? We've seen eradicating Hamas. We've seen all the war aims that were defined. And now a new war aim, which is to bring the civilian population in Israel back to the north part of the country. I think there is no way that this could be achieved except by diplomatic solutions. So I think the fate of the Israeli leaders, they take precedence over their own citizens. Because there exists a diplomatic way forward. There exists a diplomatic way forward through stopping the slaughter in Gaza and simultaneously stopping the slaughter in Lebanon.
But if we assume that third-party diplomacy, and I'm talking here again most particularly about the United States, is going to be slow at best, ineffectual at worst, I mean, the buck stops, doesn't it, with Lebanon as well here, and Lebanon's diplomats and politicians really need to be a part of the solution as well, don't they?
Definitely. We've said we are ready to deploy all efforts to make sure that peace and de-escalation prevails. But today the ball is on the other side's hands.
And all the while, innocent Lebanese people are stuck in the middle between a conflict that they didn't start. This is about Hezbollah on the one side, the Israeli government on the other. But, you know, the vast majority of Lebanese people support, really, at heart, neither of the two sides, do they?
It's not about Hezbollah anymore. It's about Lebanon. Hezbollah is part of Lebanon, but what at stake today is Lebanon, because the areas and the civilians that are being slaughtered are not necessarily Hezbollah members or Hezbollah associated individuals. It's a carpet bombing for the whole country in Lebanon. So it's not about Hezbollah anymore. It's about Lebanon.
So basically, as a Lebanese person, that means you have no choice but to support Hezbollah in its continued provocations, because viewed from the Israeli side, what I keep hearing from Israeli politicians, Israeli military figures is, if Hezbollah keeps firing, as they have done for the last 11 and a half months, projectiles into our territory, what are we supposed to do? Sit there and do nothing?
That's a classical rhetoric that we've been hearing from the Israelis, always scapegoating and blaming others for the warmongering. If it's not Hezbollah, then it's Hamas. If it's not Hamas, they even bashed the UN because the Secretary General told them to hold back. It's always this paranoid, even Hezbollah, even everyone is saying that once it ends everywhere. Once they halt their military operations in Gaza, it will halt in Lebanon, and there is always a way to find a diplomatic solution.
Do you think there are any people in Lebanon who are thinking, actually, the Israelis have a point, and we'd quite like to see the back of Hezbollah ourselves? Do you think anyone has that opinion? And if they do, why aren't we hearing it?
Well, of course, in Lebanon, there are different views. But when it comes to Israel, when it becomes to Israeli behavior, I think all Lebanese are united in denouncing this behavior and resisting this aggression.
Do you think a ground invasion looks likely at this stage?
I hope not. I hope they've learned from history. They've tried it in 2006, and we've seen the outcome. They've tried it in 1982, and we've seen the outcome. This can only empower extremism. This can only empower maximalist positions. They are serving the opposite cause that they are claiming they want to serve.
What's the latest information you've got about the areas of Lebanon that have been targeted? We've got information about Christian towns that have been hit, which obviously have no affiliation, we assume, with Hezbollah. What's the latest you've got about who's being targeted and what that tells us about Israel's strategy here?
The only logic, I think, in targeting that the Israelis have is the one of inflicting maximum civilian casualties. Because if you want to follow the diagram of their targets, you don't find any rationale. I mean, what's the rationale in hitting a 6 stories building that everybody knows is, well, there are just ordinary civilians in it. So I think the real war aim is to shock and awe. The real aim is to intimidate. The real war aim is to reestablish what they think is the deterrence image, which I think is irreversibly tarnished.
How long can Lebanon hold out with this kind of Israeli bombardment going on?
Well, obviously, it's a tragic situation. Already the death toll is intolerable. But Lebanon is a resilient country, and it can always bounce back. And with the spirit of national cohesion that we're seeing today in Lebanon, notwithstanding differences, but Israel will never be able to exploit these differences. So the country will hold and will tolerate, notwithstanding, of course, the difficult situation, the tragic situation that we're going through.
And how would you characterize it? Would you call this a war? Would you call it an invasion, a special military operation? What's your word for this?
It's an all-out aggression with war crimes being committed, and which has not just started on Monday. It had started before. I mean, take the pagers. Take the pages, which has been described by the United Nations itself of war crimes, because when you detonate devices in a civilian medium, without prior knowledge of who is at the time of the attack in possession of these devices. This is a violation to international humanitarian law. And yet, the denialism in Israel, we hear statements that this was a targeted attack.
And when you look at the death toll, and you've mentioned it's an intolerable death toll, there are images we're seeing every day of houses being destroyed, people's livelihoods being destroyed. I mean, apart from the human cost, there's a financial cost to all of this. Who's going to pay for this damage? Is Hezbollah going to pay for it? Will insurers pay for it? Would Israel pay for it? What do you think?
Well, you know, as Lebanon has been for the last 10 years undertaking a global public good. It's a country hosting refugees. It's a country that has been hostage to many regional conflicts. So I think there is a need in due course for some sort of a reconstruction effort which should be supported by the international community.
How are you feeling personally? You're based in London. You're far away from where this is all happening, and you're having to see your people suffering on a day-to-day basis now. How does that make you feel personally? Well,
clearly I'm appalled. I'm far away in London, but I have close family now with risks for their lives. So I think if you would ask any Lebanese, whether in Lebanon or overseas, he would tell you that we're just shocked and appalled and frustrated and revolted against this criminal behavior that Israel is inflicting on our country.
And what's your message to the wider world? What would you like to tell people as a call to action, or some sort of a message you think people need to hear about this conflict?
Well, Lebanon has always been a peaceful country. As I said, it has been undertaking a global public good now for years, hosting 2 million refugees for a country of 4 million. Lebanon is a country of deep and proud culture and creative industries. Lebanon is this beautiful country in the region, and it's currently being destroyed by Israel. But as I said, the country will bounce back.
And we've heard about border crossings between Lebanon and Syria being struck, 4 of them in particular, 4 key border crossings. Why is Israel hitting those targets, do you think?
Because it wants to block any way out for Lebanese fleeing for their lives towards Syria. That's another criminal war tactic. They're taking civilians as hostages. I think we're witnessing the same playbook that was used in Gaza in the current, last year. It's exactly the same terror playbook. The same toolkit is being used. Except that this time it has real risks for regional spillover.
And with regards to that spillover, I mean, one of the topics we're discussing today on this program is, what the scope of a broader regional war might be. I mean, what would you envisage were this to erupt into a full-blown war involving the region? What would the region actually? What would that mean? Which countries would end up being involved?
We all know the geopolitics of the region, and we hope that we would not get there, and that diplomacy and wisdom will prevail, and that we will be able to reverse this horrific trend. But at the same time, the social fabric of the region is shared by all its countries. So it's so difficult to confine and contain one single conflict in one theater. That's why we said it's of utmost importance to stop the current Israeli aggression, especially that there is an alternative diplomatic way. It's really an unnecessary war, except for restoring deterrence, Israeli deterrence, except for maybe Israeli leaders escaping internal domestic accountability and hence wanting to put their countries on a continual path of war and violence. this war serves no purpose. And as I said, it's not about Hezbollah, it's about Lebanon, because the country itself, its people throughout their views and differences and the things they agree upon or disagree upon, but today they're all united in confronting this aggression.
And what's the role of the Lebanese army in all of this? And were there to be an invasion on the ground, would the Lebanese army be fighting side by side with Hezbollah? How would that work?
Well, as any army, no army can sit idly when it sees an enemy invading his country. That's the most generic answer that I can give you. I think the Lebanese army is a national institution that enjoys huge popular support in Lebanon. And in due course, it will undertake its duty of that it has always, as it has always done, to defend the national territories and the people of Lebanon.
Sure,
it's not about fighting side by side by Hezbollah. The Lebanese army are the prime armed force responsible for the defense of the country.
And of course, there's UNIFIL on the ground. There's around 10,000 UNIFIL soldiers on the ground there. And I'm just wondering what their role as peacekeepers is going to have to turn into if there's a war going on around them. It's something I can't comprehend, being a peacekeeper in the midst of a war. I mean, would they be told to leave? Would they be told to stand down?
I think it's their mission is of vital importance, because at some point we would need to empower UNIFIL for it to play its role as described by Security Council Resolution 1701. So UNIFIL has been doing an excellent job for decades now. And one should not underestimate the contribution of UNIFIL to peace and stability. Of course, its mission is heavily challenged, and it's challenged by Israel. Actually, it has always been challenged by Israel. Israel always looked at UNIFIL, has belittled the importance of UNIFIL, because they don't want eyewitnesses on the ground. You know, UNIFIL reports regularly on its theater of operation. That's why Israel always targeted, and they even physically targeted UNIFIL back in 96 and 2006. They lost lives. I hope this time that there will be no losses amongst amongst UNIFIL. But I think it's a very important and a mission of strategic importance.
And what do you make of the news we've learnt in the course of this evening that Israel says it secured this $8.7 billion US aid package from the United States? This is to support, quote, its ongoing military efforts. What do you think about Israel being given $8.7 billion US by the United States, who then put forward a ceasefire proposal that Israel seems not to be at all interested in and frankly has ignored? What's your thinking here?
Well, that's why I said all the levers that anyone could have to help influence Israeli behavior should be used. So if this money was given for nothing, it's unfortunate. Anyway, it's a bilateral relationship. I think it's not for me to comment on how the United States might build its bilateral relations. But what I would say is that we need honest brokers in the region. It's a very complex region, and the United States remains a superpower, and we count on its role in brokering some sort of an arrangement, an alternative to war and death and destruction.
Just lastly, I'd just like to get your thoughts looking forwards. I mean, where you see things heading to from here. If this ceasefire hasn't worked out, we've got the UN General Assembly ongoing. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, due to address that body tomorrow. Where do you see events how do you see events unfolding during the course of the next few days?
Well, what I can tell you is that the same arrangement that we would be able to conclude sparing a new round of violence is the same one that we would conclude after in a month or 2 months. The only difference is that civilians would have paid the price. So there is really no need for this round of violence, because a diplomatic alternative exists. Now, we are faced with an uncertain era ahead. You know, the American elections, we have the internal dynamics inside Israel, where there is an extreme right coalition and a difficult coalition to hold. So it's a really complex situation ahead. That's why I hope that things will be curbed as soon as possible before we enter into additional complications.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Lebanon's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Rami Mortala, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, in an interview with my colleague Hadley Gamble, the former Lebanese MP Walid Jumblatt said that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't care about the US representative. This after he launched the attack on Lebanon just one day after the US Special Envoy Amos Hochstein was in Israel.
How telling was it that the attacks on Hezbollah came just one day after the US representative was in Israel having meetings to calm the situation?
It means that they don't care about the US representative. They just don't care. I mean, you're speaking about Hochstein.
Yes.
He doesn't care. The Israelis, Netanyahu, doesn't care about him. He dismisses any effort, although minimal, of US administration to try to appease a little bit, to cool it down.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined here in the studio by our chief US correspondent, Simon Moggs. Simon, very warm welcome to you. Great to have you with us here in the studio. I just want to start by asking you how you'd characterize the state of relations between Israel and the United States right now.
Well, I think in a word, Tom, very complicated. I mean, there's no question about that. The United States government feels enormous frustration over its dealings with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet. I think unprecedented in the modern era in terms of how difficult that relationship has become. And yet, even within the last few hours, Israel has announced that it's receiving another $8.7 billion in military assistance from the United States. President Biden continues to maintain that American support for Israel is ironclad, that the country, as he said at the United Nations just the other day, had a right and a responsibility to react in the aftermath of October the 7th. And yet, clearly, there are deep frustrations and deep fissures between the Israeli war cabinet and the Prime Minister and his American interlocutors. And what has been so astounding to witness over the last few months is the number of occasions when Antony Blinken has travelled to the region, he's met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's come out and he said there's been some kind of a breakthrough. We've secured an agreement, particularly with advancing the talks about the possibility of a ceasefire. And within an hour, 2 hours of Antony Blinken's departure from Israel, the Israeli Prime Minister publicly has pulled the rug out from beneath him. And that is very, very grating for the Americans.
Indeed, as you say, a huge sense of frustration there in D.C. And I'm assuming that with the US presidential election just 5 weeks away now, foreign policy, which isn't typically something at the forefront of people's minds, is now quite prominent in terms of what's being said on the campaign trail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worth also just noting that with now, around 115 days left in Joe Biden's presidency, because we all now know when he leaves office, he becomes something of a lame duck, and the Israelis are taking some advantage of that. And there is obviously doubt about who will succeed him. Will it be, as President Biden insists, Kamala Harris, who has said that she will not be silent about what is taking place at the hands of the Israeli military in Gaza and now also in the West Bank. But she hasn't indicated precisely how that transfers into policy changes. And Donald Trump, who, of course, is mounting vigorous attacks on Iran on the campaign trail, insisting, again, without providing any detail, that he can resolve the crisis in the Middle East in 24 hours should he be elected president. What is interesting about this election cycle, and it's the first time that we've seen this, again in the modern era, is that the votes of Arab Americans, particularly in crucial battleground states like Michigan, cannot be taken for granted by the Democrats. So many Arab Americans have said they simply will not turn out and vote for Kamala Harris, although there has been some shift in that over the last 24 hours, with one large advocacy group representing Arab American voices saying that it is endorsing Kamala Harris for the presidency because they see her as the lesser of two evils in terms of the choice American voters are facing. But there's no doubt Kamala Harris has got a lot of work ahead to try and get that vote out for her, because there is so much frustration felt across the Arab American community with the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the situation.
And is there a sense that a Trump administration would have an enormous bearing on events in the Middle East? Would it change very much?
Everything with Donald Trump, in every regard, is always transactional. His relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he says, became strained. He wasn't happy with some of the things that Benjamin Netanyahu said and did in the final days of his own presidency and then in its aftermath. Is that going to be a relationship that quickly gets put back together? Who will the Sherpas be for all of that? Are we going to see Jared Kushner returning to a position of influence and power in a second Trump administration? He's not been evident on the campaign trail at all, and his wife, the president's daughter Ivanka, has totally taken herself out of the political conversation. Trump absolutely is going to be, should he be elected, leading an administration that is deeply hostile to Iran, even though we heard at the United Nations this week relatively conciliatory messages from Masoud Pezeshkian, the new Iranian president. What kind of approach is he going to take? It's very, very difficult to divine because there have been so few specifics offered, but equally very few specifics offered, as I was saying, by Kamala Harris.
Let's turn our attention to the UN General Assembly, and I assume there's been a great flurry of activity there in New York on the sidelines, if not in the main auditorium.
Yeah, massive activity by Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, trying to put together, succeeding in putting together, this 12-country alliance that has called for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah. And that, of course, is designed, as Joe Biden always does, to demonstrate that he's got international solidarity and to put pressure on both the governments of Lebanon and Israel to find a way of stepping back, in the case of the Israelis, from the brink. The Israelis, another example of Benjamin Netanyahu absolutely pulling the rug out from beneath Joe Biden, saying that he had no interest in this call for the ceasefire by the US and its dozen or so allies. It remains to be seen whether all of that hard work behind the scenes by Antony Blinken can actually succeed in delaying the inevitability of a possible Israeli ground assault on Lebanon, a ground assault that many observers in the United States, foreign policy analysts argue, cannot work if its stated goal is to destroy Hezbollah, any more than the assault in Gaza has worked trying to destroy Hamas, that ultimately you have to engage diplomatically and politically to try and change things rather than simply thinking that military might in either of those cases is going to work.
OK, well, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu due to address the UN General Assembly on Friday. That's tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see what he says and what kind of a welcome he gets there as well. But thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Our chief US correspondent, Simon Marks. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, let's get some more analysis on the situation on the ground and the tactics on the battlefield. We can speak to retired four-star general who served as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Philip Breedlove. General Breedlove, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. The latest on the diplomatic front is that we hear Israel is flatly rejecting this 21-day ceasefire proposal that was championed by the United States and France. Instead, Israel vowing to continue the fight with the full force until victory. That's their words. What does victory look like, do you think, to the Israelis?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and I'm happy to talk with you today. Victory, I think, first and foremost, is that Iran and its proxies stop firing missiles into Israel. I think the goals of Israel have, whether we agree with them or not, have been pretty clear, and that is to eliminate the terrorist threat to Israel. So far, the terrorists have not chosen to stop. And I think it's important every time we have this conversation, it's really important to remember everything starts in Iran and everything ends in Iran. And so these actions of the proxies against Israel are for a purpose and at a purpose for Iranians' ends and goals.
It's a similar stated goal to Israel's goal in Gaza, which was to destroy Hamas. And yet, time and time again, we speak to analysts, regional experts who say you can't destroy Hamas. Now we're hearing people saying you can't destroy Hezbollah. These are organizations that don't necessarily have an HQ with the word Hezbollah on the exterior. These are ideas, these are ideologies that exist within the homes of people, in the minds of people, in communities, and it simply can't be done. So do you think it's a realistic goal to call off diplomacy until something unrealistic can be achieved?
Well, we always have to have diplomacy. Everything ends in diplomacy, even wars of complete defeat. There's diplomacy and an agreement at the end of them. So diplomacy can't fall by the wayside. We need to keep it up. But you need two realistic and honest participants to negotiate. And right now, it's very clear that Hamas and Hezbollah, they have no intention of stopping attacking Israel. I think it's very clear that both Hamas and Hezbollah and their Iranian backers and bosses, I think they all understand that Hezbollah and Hamas will never defeat Israel. But if they keep kicking the hornet's nest, if they keep agitating and killing Israelis, then Israel is going to respond. And what Hamas and Hezbollah are counting on is that the world opinion and frankly, journalists and everyone else will turn against Israel, and they will defeat Israel for Hamas and Hezbollah, because Hamas and Hezbollah absolutely, completely know they cannot defeat Israel. They need the Western world to defeat Israel for them.
But I think it's fair to say that, terrorizing the Lebanese population, the majority of whom do not support Hezbollah, is not necessarily the right way to go around securing Israel's northern border.
I will agree with part of what you said. We do not support nor want this to impact the people of either Gaza or Lebanon. I mean, I don't think that anybody even believes that's what Israel wants to do. If they do, I think they're mistaken. Israel doesn't want that. But Israel has to defend itself, in my opinion, against these two terrorist organizations, and most importantly, against Iran, who, once again, I want to point out, is behind it all. And so when Hezbollah and Hamas hide themselves among the populace, use the populace as a human shield, hide in homes among other homes, this is what happens. And so what, if anything, are we going to see from the people of Gaza or the people of Lebanon to reject Hamas and reject Hezbollah? You know, some of the Hamas leaders are among the richest people in this world. Where is their money trying to fix what's going on in Gaza? We see clearly that these two terrorist organizations and their sponsors in Iran are using the plight of the people in Gaza and Lebanon to affect what we talked about before. The terrorists, need the world to defeat Israel for them because they are incapable of defeating Israel.
And just drawing on your military background, your military knowledge, which is extremely rich, looking at the targets that the Israeli military has been striking, they say we've hit some 75 terror targets in the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon, also in the south. Just looking at the sorts of targets that have been hit up until now, what does that tell us about what Israel is specifically trying to achieve here?
So I think there's two thrusts to what they're doing, two types of targets. One set of targets are obviously military targets. They are storage areas, missile launching sites, and so forth. The Israeli intelligence is extremely good, and they are striking those known targets. You saw just the other day the picture of the missile inside the home among other homes. This is the way that Hezbollah operates. But on the other side, which I think is being very successful, they are striking leadership. If you look at the top of either Hamas or Hezbollah leadership, and if you had plotted that organizational chart, say 2 or 3 months ago, and now you look at that chart and who has been eliminated, these organizations are in disarray because they are systematically taking out leadership. And once again, these leaders cloak themselves in the people of both Lebanon and Gaza. So it's a hard target to strike, and to strike precisely, and to try to limit collateral damage. And therefore you see some loss, as we discussed.
And just specifically with regards to Hezbollah's capability, when you compare where they are today to where they were, say, 2 weeks ago, and that was prior to the attacks on their communication systems, the pages that blew up, the walkie-talkies, and the targeted attacks that have taken out some of the senior individuals. We gather even today the head of the drone-making team in Hezbollah has been targeted. We don't know if he's being killed or not. But how much weakened, would you say, has Hezbollah been by events during the course of the last 10 days, 2 weeks?
Well, I am not the expert on that organizational chart, but I have read from several who are world leaders in this kind of thought, and they are attributing a pretty fair impact based on who and when they have been killed. I used their words earlier. I'm sort of quoting the reading I'm doing, which says that the leadership is a bit in disarray because they're being disassembled from the top, and this is going to be a problem. But the sad news is, remember, and this will be the third time I've said it, this is about Iran. and Iran will supply the money and try to replace these leaders in order to keep their proxies stirring up Israel.
And just going back to battlefield tactics, there is lots of speculation about what Israel's going to do next. A ground invasion, something a lot of people talking about. We haven't heard whether that's definitely going to happen or not, but certainly there are quite a lot of noises that suggest that a ground invasion could be imminent. Would that be advisable from a military point of view?
Well, I think it's exactly what Hezbollah wants. Let's just remember one more time. Hezbollah knows they cannot defeat Israel militarily. And so they need Israel to kill innocents in their attempts to take out Hezbollah. They need the world and the world press to take out Israel because they can't. And so I believe that Hezbollah will keep prodding and keep prodding and keep prodding until Israel effects a more damaging war, because that's what Hezbollah needs and that's what Hezbollah wants in Lebanon.
But militarily speaking, would a ground invasion be more or less dangerous, hazardous for the general population than, say, airstrikes, where...
Of course it would. Of course it would. Right now, we're watching Israel striking as precisely as possible, and it's not always possible, using highly precise weapons to take out very discrete targets. When you go in a ground war, there is less discretion. There has to be.
Oh, just for the benefit of our viewers as well, and I have to say this, that only last week there was a case in the south of Beirut where one top commander was killed, but that did come at the expense of some 50 other lives. So I'm not sure I 100% agree with that. But I just want to ask you next about the risk of escalation.
Well, whose choice was that? Whose choice was that?
No, but there were women and children.
Leader surrounded himself with innocents. That leader hides among the innocents. Their facilities are hiding among the innocents. So I think clearly the decision to do that was costly, and I agree with you. 50 is a tough number. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to affix the blame where it belongs, and that is with the terrorists.
Sure. And I just want to ask you next about where you see this heading to, because ever since the 7th of October, we've talked about the dangers of this escalating into a full-blown regional war. Are we looking like we're heading in that direction, would you say?
I don't think so. And here's why. Once again, fourth time now, this is all about Iran. Iran doesn't want a regional war because that might involve Iran, and Iran knows that it would lose in a regional war, and that its proxies would lose in a regional war. I, once again, would just offer that Iran needs to keep kicking the hornet's nest, keep agitating Israel, keep killing Israelis so that Israel will react, and then the world will try to stop Israel.
And which countries do you think would be involved were things to escalate? I mean, what would be the scope of an escalate? I know you don't think it's likely to happen, but were things to escalate to the point that this full-blown regional war that we've heard so much about for the last 11 and a half months, were that scenario to be realized? I mean, just how broad could the area involved actually be?
I think that would be completely up to the Iranians. Whoever their proxies fire at, they would probably become involved. So whoever Iran directs their proxies to attack, those would probably become involved. We know that the United States will be involved because we've already, when Iran has attacked into Israel directly from Iran, U.S. forces have thwarted and shot down missiles and provided air defense, et cetera, et cetera. So we know the United States would be involved. But beyond that, I think Iran controls. If they direct their proxies to attack different countries, then I expect those countries would become involved.
And just lastly, General, just talking about the United States and diplomatic efforts to bring about a resolution to these two crises. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's been, I believe, more than 10 times now to the region to try to broker a truce since the 7th of October. There was a truce in November of last year, but there hasn't been another one since then in Gaza. And this latest initiative to introduce a ceasefire in Lebanon has been flatly rejected by the Israelis. I mean, do you slightly get the impression that the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu is not really paying a huge amount of attention to the US Secretary of State?
Well, what I would say is, much like in the United States as it relates to Ukraine, the type of response that Israel is going to have is deeply tied to political lines and political positions. And Mr. Netanyahu has a particular support base and a particular way of approaching this war. There are others in this country that have different thoughts, but right now he's in charge, and so they will proceed a track, much like in America when it comes to Ukraine. Ukraine has been completely politicized. We're not making decisions in America about what's right for the world and what's right for Ukraine and what's right for Europe. It's rather wrapped up in political positions. And so I think that that we will see a continuation of sort of present course in Israel. But again, this completely relies on what Hezbollah and Hamas do. If they stop firing missiles and attacking Israel, I think very good things could and should happen. But as long as they keep firing missiles to keep Israel stirred up, then it's not going to go well.
And just an extension of that point, I mean, we've got an election looming in the United States in about 5 weeks from now. Do you think that's the outcome of that election is likely to have a significant bearing on these events thousands of kilometers away?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Retired four-star General Philip Breedlove. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's get the latest now on the humanitarian situation on the ground in Lebanon. And we can speak to Dr. Tania Baban, who is the Lebanon country director of the medical charity Med Global. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. 75 targets were hit overnight. I just wondered if you could start by bringing us up to speed on what you've heard about the scale of the damage from the latest attacks.
So what we know so far, Tom, is that at least 90,000 people have been newly displaced since this military escalation started on September 19. And this is adding to the already 100,000+ people who were being displaced slowly over the last 11 months. The Lebanese Ministry of Health has reported that nearly 600 people have been killed since Monday, and including 50 children and 58 women, and approximately 1,700 people have been injured. We've been seeing the massive displacements of tens of thousands of people coming into Beirut from the south, from the Biqa, from the Baalbek area, and we're still seeing the numbers flooding in. Every time we go on the field to do an assessment to see the numbers in the schools turned shelters, we still see them coming in. We're doing needs assessments on a daily basis. We started distributing basic need kits on the first day, and that included 100 mattresses, 100 packs of kitchen utilities, clothing, shoes, including anti-lice medication. So this is really ongoing, and it changes on an hourly basis.
I'm just wondering, is the Lebanese government sort of leading the way here, or is it really up to NGOs and the solidarity of Lebanese society to sort of help each other out? I mean, what are you seeing?
So we've been seeing a lot of personal initiatives, really, which has been very heartwarming. But obviously, the Ministry of Health has been very involved from the very beginning. They started planning and gearing up for the possibility of mass casualties and training hospital frontliners to receive that amount of patients 11 months ago. So that, in addition to the national cluster, the health cluster that coordinates all the international and local NGOs that work in the healthcare system, so that we can align our activities and not overlap in areas or in material. So this has been very closely coordinated, very closely monitored, and the Ministry of Health is very active, and they're doing an amazing job, really. I mean, on the day of the beeper detonation, they were able to dispatch 2,800 ambulances within 1 hour, and that's because we were able to proudly, with them, establish what we're calling a command and control center. And that's just to be able to coordinate these dispatches with the hospitals and doing the triages while they're on the way to the hospital, so that we can decrease the risk of patient morbidity and decrease deaths.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about the Lebanese health system and what it's had to go through in the last few years. I mean, you think about COVID, the Beirut explosion. Then we've had this economic crisis, which has seen hundreds of doctors decide to leave Lebanon and go and live abroad out of necessity to make a living. I mean, and now this. I mean, it really makes you wonder how the health system can sustain such a level of pressure. How long do you think this is sustainable for?
Absolutely, Tom. The healthcare system has been through a lot. Let me remind you that Lebanon in the region really has one of the most skilled number of physicians and healthcare workers, including healthcare facilities. We've lost 30% of that human resources, but a lot of the doctors are still here. Our doctors are very highly skilled, very qualified, all of whom are either American board, European board, or Canadian board certified. And they're trying to do their absolute best with the support of the Ministry of Health, with the support of the resources that are coming through the INGOs. How long will this last? It would depend on how long this war would last. Whatever we're doing to maximize our efforts to save as many lives as possible. But this is not sustainable on the long run. I mean, as of the 25th of September, as of yesterday, carrier flights who are coming in with possible shipments that we were donating to the Ministry of Health have been stopped. So now we have to think of alternative routes to get our shipments into the country. And that's a horrifying scenario. I mean, we learned from what we saw in Gaza that they were locked in without the ability to bring in resources. And if that happens in Lebanon as well, we see a humanitarian catastrophe that's about to happen. And, and we're really pleading that this should stop. Enough bloodshed, enough civilian casualties. Civilians should not be a target. Children should not be a target. Medical healthcare workers should not be a target. And this war has been going on for almost a year. Thousands of people, innocent civilians, have lost their lives. And it's starting again in Lebanon. And this really needs to stop.
Yeah, indeed. I was just thinking about the airport with the fact that so few flights are now operational between Lebanon and the rest of the world. I believe there's only the national carrier of Lebanon that's operating flights right now. And as you say, the supplies aren't coming through. The medicines won't be aboard those planes that would normally be aboard them. What sort of supplies do you see running out first? And is any aid managing to get through on the flights that are coming back? Because presumably passenger flights are leaving full of people and coming back relatively empty. Does that mean that perhaps there's scope for bringing more supplies back in on those flights?
We're trying to find alternative routes, definitely. What we saw already run out within 2 days of receiving the displaced people into Beirut were the mattresses. The Minister of Education turned all the schools into shelters to absorb as many people as possible. And we were able to assess more than 35 schools. Certain complexes house more than 10,000 people. So last night, MedGlobal staff went on the ground and distributed more than 100 mattresses because a lot of people, disabled children, elderly patients, were sleeping on cardboards. And as of yesterday, Beirut ran out of mattresses. So we had to go out of the city, out of the capital, to be able to find those, to get them and distribute them. But I see that expanding to everything else. We already started seeing inflation in food. So the bread started increasing in its prices. I'm sure medications will be next. Already, as you mentioned, since the economic crisis and since the collapse in 2019, people can't afford their basic chronic medications. So whatever we still have standing is because of the aid and the help that is coming through. If that is to stop, then this is going to be a massacre.
I mean, it's extraordinary to be reading that some 20,000 people have already fled Lebanon and crossed the border into Syria. I mean, that's a real story of the reversal of fortunes for those two countries. And it's not to say that things in Syria are by any means stable or comfortable for people who are arriving there. But I'm just wondering, I mean, what choices people have at this stage. I mean, where can people flee to if they're being told to leave their homes, particularly in the south or in the Bekaa Valley? Where can people go?
So we know that the people are displacing to Beirut. Some have moved to the Bekaa, which is not very safe. This is central West Bekaa. But also we're seeing some displacement that is happening towards the north. So we saw a lot of people get into Tripoli and the northern parts of Lebanon. But where can people go? You're completely right. People have to leave their homes and they're leaving everything behind. And I find it very very difficult to think that the easiest thing for us to ask people is where would you go, rather than ask people to stop this war. So instead of asking people to leave their homes, to leave everything they know behind, we need to have the people involved, the politicians, the people in power, sit on a table and discuss this to stop this escalation, to stop this bloodshed.
Just another sort of anecdotal story I wanted to ask you about is the fake news that's doing the rounds at the moment on social media. There are false reports of the military escalation in some parts of the country that are then debunked. I've been reading about that in L'Orient Le Jour, the Lebanese daily. And I'm just wondering, what is a reliable source of information for people there on the ground? If people want reliable information about where they should go to, where they should flee from, where there might be food distribution centres. What's the source of information?
So there are internal groups. So as humanitarians, as the health cluster, we circulate this information that comes out of the Ministry of Health amongst ourselves. We have coordinating groups that get in touch, that divide the areas, that divide the resources, that divide the schools to be able to align that work and for us to be working simultaneously. And we circulate that comes out of the governments. So we only use information that we know is credible to be able to follow. When it comes to the people, these are usually being circulated, on WhatsApp. They're being shared in certain groups, or they're being shared on social media. So people are able to do that. On the first day of displacement, we saw a lot of people sharing their concern about having nowhere to stay on social media. And really, the public came rushing to help, and they would send them details of houses they can rent, where shelters were being held, and giving that information online. So people have access to that. And there's been an amazing surge of community assistance and personal initiatives that have been really heartwarming.
Yeah, that must give people a lot of cause for hope and optimism at a very dark time. And I just want to ask you about your personal experience. I mean, you're on the front line. I don't know exactly where you are, but have you felt that you're personally in danger?
I'm in Beirut, so I'm in central Beirut. I'm 10 minutes away from the areas that are being attacked in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And personally, I had to obviously ask my parents to leave the country, because that kind of puts less pressure on me having to wonder whether or not I'll be able to find their medications, if any of them get sick, whether or not I'll be able to rush them to the hospital. The hospitals are already overwhelmed. But also my friends have advised me to have a go bag. I had never even heard of that term before, but I have a go bag ready by the door, including just documents and some cash should we need to evacuate. But the question comes back to what you asked me. If I do have to evacuate, where do I go? It's a very difficult scenario to think of. And every time you try to put yourself in the place of the displaced people, it's very heartbreaking because it's very difficult to imagine this happening to yourself. And you feel that, you're in a blessed position to be able to be the person providing the help rather than needing it. And this is what keeps us going on a daily basis. We're working up to 3, 4 a.m. in the morning and we're not stopping. We're going to keep doing this until we help every person we possibly can.
No, well, I'm sure your help is hugely appreciated. We wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Tanya
Thank you,
Baban,
Tom.
Lebanon Country Director for the medical charity Med Global. Thank you. Well, let's get some more analysis on the legality of the conflict in Lebanon and indeed in Gaza. We can speak to William Shabas, who's Professor of International and Criminal Law at Middlesex University. Professor, thank you for joining us. You're an expert in international human rights law, international criminal law. You've written extensively on these subjects and many others. You're also the former chair of the UN committee which investigated the role of Israel in the 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. If you will, I'd like to start by talking about what's happening in Lebanon, very much in the main body of our news at the moment. More than 600 people have been killed there in recent days. Would you say up until this point, and I know the laws of war are complicated, this is grey territory because Israel says that Hezbollah is not a state. Well, Hezbollah is not a state. It's obviously a body within a state. Is Israel acting legally or illegally in what's happening in Lebanon?
You have to look at this question there are two dimensions to it. The first is whether the use of force at all is lawful. Israel is going to argue that they're being attacked from inside Lebanon, and so they're entitled to use force in self-defense. This is almost a mantra in the discussions where people defend Israel's conduct by saying, well, they're entitled to act in self-defense. I find that to be a rather sterile avenue, because the real question is whether the actions that they undertake in self-defense, allegedly, are in fact legitimate in terms of the laws and customs of war. That is, the conduct of the conflict. So this involves issues about targeting, about what they're trying to accomplish, about trying to peer through their motives to see if this is really, again, in Gaza, it was a question of recovering the hostages, and whether that was really what they were up to, or whether really the underlying theme of the conflict was actually to make Gaza unlivable and in some way or another clear the entire territory of Palestinians. So I think in southern Lebanon, this is perhaps not quite the same issue, but there's no doubt that when we see these huge numbers of civilian casualties, that it looks really like this is a pattern. This is the way Israel conducted the conflict in Gaza, and they're going ahead now in southern Lebanon with the same kind of indifference to casualties among non-combatants. And this is obviously raising issues about the legality of the way they're conducting the conflict.
But Israel would argue, and just, on that issue of legitimate self-defense, we're talking about Hezbollah here, which has repeatedly attacked Israel for more than 11 months. There had to come a point when Israel hit back, and legally speaking, 11 months of documented attacks on a nation by, albeit a non-state actor, which Hezbollah is, does merit the argument self-defense, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not really trying to quarrel about that issue, and I don't think that whether Hezbollah is the state of Lebanon, which it's not, or whether it's a non-state actor, really changes very much, because the fact is there is a conflict going on, and the attitude to be taken to the proportionality of the means that are used, to the choice of weapons, to the targeting, all of this really is the same whether Hezbollah is a state or whether it's a non-state actor. This is really not an important issue. It has no great significance, or none at all, from a legal standpoint. So Israel is required to act proportionately, and that means that in effect they have to protect civilian non-combatants from the conflict, and they have to target the combatants. And what we're seeing, as we've seen for the last 11 months, almost a year now, in Gaza is that the civilians bear the brunt of the attacks. And that leads to the suggestion that it's not just being indifferent to the casualties among the civilians, but that in some way the civilians are themselves the target.
And what is the legality with regards to giving prior warning to, for example, an airstrike on an area that's densely populated, as Israel has done in, for example, the southern suburbs of Beirut, but also in Gaza? What is the obligation legally for a nation to forewarn people on the ground that such a strike is imminent?
Well, there's no rule about this. It's not like we have an app on our iPhone telling us how much notice you have to give and to whom you have to give the notice. The idea of giving the notice is to respect the idea that civilians are given a chance to get out of the way. And then the question really is the reality of the warning, whether the warning is in fact given with sufficient time and whether the civilians have some place to go, in fact, if they flee whatever the target is that's being contemplated. We saw this in the conflict in 2014, where Israel would target a building, for example, where there were civilians living in the building, and they had the telephone numbers. They would telephone people, and they would also do something they called roof knocking, where they would let off a small bomb on the roof of the building at the upper floor. And this was to warn the civilians that, get out as quickly as you could. So sometimes the civilians had enough time to get out. And so it was very correct that Israel did this. In other times, it was kind of meaningless. There would be large families. The lifts weren't working in the buildings. They had to run down the stairs. And the warning wasn't really sufficient enough to achieve what its alleged purpose was. So it looked good on paper, but the reality of it was quite different.
So what you're saying is that when, for example, Israel drops leaflets on an area, as they have done in parts of Lebanon, as they did in parts of Gaza, when they send these automated messages to people's telephones saying, evacuate to a safe area, are you basically saying this is window dressing? It's to make them look good on the international stage?
Well, I think you have to look at this on a case-by-case level. You have to look at each specific incident and to see how real and how significant that was, and then draw conclusions. I'm not in a position to do this. I know that Israel does it. I know that the Palestinians in Gaza are constantly complaining that the notice isn't sufficient enough, or that they have no place to go, that there's no safe place. And as you know, the Palestinians in Gaza have been on a kind of a game of musical chairs where they have to move every few weeks to another area because the area where they've been told to move as a safe zone is no longer safe. So it's about the reality of that, and I'm personally too far away from the ground to be able to tell you how much of it is real and how much of it is window dressing, as you say.
And what about the booby traps in the pages and the walkie-talkies? I mean, that's something the like of which no one's ever seen before. It's a tactic that hasn't been used, as far as anyone's aware, on a scale like that in living memory. Does that pose any legal issues as far as you're concerned?
Yes, it does. I mean, I think that the use of these booby-trapped telephones or pagers, and there were reports of other things, everything from solar panels to mobile phones and walkie-talkies and so on. I don't know how much of that. I think we're still waiting to get the full truth on how all of that worked. But very clearly, the danger of that is that you can give somebody what in effect is a booby-trapped item that is going to go off at some point. But when it goes off, you don't know whether they're going to be sitting around, whether they're going to be in a hospital visiting a patient who's ill, and so on. It's a way of targeting somebody, but it lacks. It's an indiscriminate weapon. I think that's the term for it, because you cannot control the environment where the bomb is going to go off. And when the day of the incident, I remember there were, I think they said in southern Lebanon, there were 12 deaths that day. This was a figure that I heard, I think, the day after. And of the 12, 4 of them were medical personnel and 2 of them were civilians who were clearly non-combatants, women or children or something. So that sort of confirmed the danger of doing this sort of a technique. To some extent, and there'll be debates about this, about whether you can booby-trap things for soldiers under ordinary circumstances or not. And there's a debate among the lawyers who are advising the military and everything about whether you can kill somebody when there's some other way of immobilizing them as a combatant, because the goal always, according to the laws of war, is that you're trying to remove the combatant from the battlefield, but to do it in the way that's the least destructive and inhumane possible. We call it sometimes the kill or capture debate, but once again, it's all about this proportionality and the indiscriminate nature of doing this, because a combatant who's having a shower, for example, in a public toilet is clearly not posing a danger. Again, this is a debatable matter, but there's no debate about whether you can set off booby traps that are then going to be are likely to have indiscriminate effects on non-combatants, and that, to me, is the problem with the pagers.
And just looking at Gaza and looking at the findings of what happened in 2014 as well, have you noticed, for example, a change in tactics, or has Israel been more aggressive or less aggressive than it was in 2014 during the Israel-Gaza conflict? What sort of evolution have you seen in this last decade?
Well, the 2014 conflict, which lasted for a period of a few months, so it was much shorter duration than what we've seen in the last year in Gaza, and the casualties amongst the civilians, the deaths of the civilians, were somewhere, I'm speaking from memory, but let me say somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500. So just on a completely different order of magnitude than what we've seen. The term that Israel was using at the time was, they were talking about mowing the lawn, cutting the grass, that they had, of course, left Gaza. They removed the settlements from Gaza back in 2005, and that periodically they would have to go in there and, as they said, cut the grass or mow the grass. But what we've seen in the last year, this is not mowing the grass. This is just destroying the whole garden. It's a very different order of magnitude. And of course, as everybody knows, it's raised questions about whether the goal is simply to tame and to master the situation, or whether it is to really, in one way or another, destroy the Palestinian people of Gaza, to get them to make the territory unlivable so that they leave or perish in one form or another. And that's, of course, what's led to the allegation of genocide, where there is a very serious case and debate going on at the International Court of Justice.
And tell us a bit about collective punishment from a legal standpoint. We hear that used quite a lot with regards to what's happened in Gaza. We've heard it with regards to what's happened in the West Bank. Indeed, we're hearing it with regards to what's been happening in Lebanon, where there's a sense that the entire population of Lebanon is being punished for the actions of Hezbollah that only represent a tiny, well, a minority, let's say, of the Lebanese population. What is the legality when it comes to collective punishment?
Simply, it's illegal. It's quite clear it's illegal. You're talking about punishment, so we want to distinguish between the action on the battlefield, the actual conflict, where there are these issues about indiscriminate weapons or of actually targeting non-combatants. But when you're talking about punishment, this is a different thing. It's not responding to military necessity. It's not a military concept at all. It's just making people pay the price for some act or another. And the rule is very clear that collective punishments are prohibited. There were people who were prosecuted after the Second World War for engaging in collective punishments. The Nazis were famous for this, and they would, there was a case in Rome where I think 33 SS soldiers were ambushed and murdered one day, and Hitler said, well, we're going to kill 10 Italians for every one German. And that was a collective punishment, because you're punishing people who had no connection with the crime and who had done nothing to deserve the punishment. So this is prohibited under all circumstances.
There's an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for Benjamin Netanyahu with regards to his actions in Gaza. I believe Israel has now challenged that arrest warrant. Do you think they'll be successful in their challenge?
Yes, I think you may be running ahead of things because the prosecutor has certainly applied for the arrest warrant. He did that at the end of May of this year, of 2024. And there's been skirmishing now before the chamber of the International Criminal Court that is to issue it. And the latest, apparently, Israel announced this, although it hasn't appeared on the website of the International Criminal Court. They have launched their own formal challenge before the court to the threat that an arrest warrant would be issued. You know, there's nothing that's provided for on that in the Rome Statute. The Rome Statute is the operative legal framework for the International Criminal Court, and it simply doesn't allow for a country coming and challenging the issuance of an arrest warrant before it's been issued. So if they do go ahead, and it seems, I mean, this is before them now. There are 3 judges. I can't prejudge the result, although I would think that from what I know of it, it's likely that they're going to issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu and against Gallant. And then that can be addressed. There are different mechanisms for raising it, although I have to say as well that the main rule in challenging an arrest warrant is you can do it if you're in custody. So it would mean that Gallant and Netanyahu would have to surrender to the court. Then they could challenge the legality of the arrest warrant. But I don't think there are many courts in the world that allow this. Most domestic systems wouldn't, where you could send your lawyer to the court saying, well, my guy's not going to surrender. He's avoiding the court, but he wants to attack the arrest warrant anyway. So the short answer then is I don't see that there's a way forward for Israel on that. They have attacked it through various proxies in a procedure that's now closed before the pretrial chamber for making submissions about some of the legal issues relating to the issuance of the arrest warrant. But that was all ended in early August, and Israel itself chose not to make a submission. Some of its friends did. Some of the friendly countries, like Germany, made submissions to the International Criminal Court, but Israel didn't. Now it says, and this was announced only a few days ago, that they had made a formal complaint or contestation. But I don't see where that fits in the procedure of the court. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. And be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Auckland. Auckland is known as a city of many lovers, according to its Maori name Tamaki Makwara, as those lovers wanted the place so badly that they fought over it for centuries. A geographically blessed city, the New Zealand capital has the appeal of a small town and the style of a modern metropolis. Auckland Museum is one of the country's most recognized heritage locations. The 84-year-old museum houses the most comprehensive collection of Maori and Pacific Islander art in the Southern Hemisphere. On display are graphic textiles, carvings, some of the war canoes, ware or the traditional Maori meeting houses, as well as other 18th and 19th century portraits. Devonport is a self-contained late Victorian neighborhood of historic sites, including North Head, a British fort dating back to 1887. There are also popular cafes and restaurants within it. Find two of Auckland's picture-perfect beaches or climb to the top of Mount Victoria for 360-degree views of the city, Hauraki Gulf, and the North Shore. Waiheke Island is a place for a quick island escape. Worth visiting are the Little Onaroa, Palm Beach, and the mile-long Onatangi. Fancy a dinner nearby with a great view of the beach. A diverse mix of gustatory pleasures, Auckland is also ideal for food trips. The city is a medley of different tastes, offering diverse cuisines from contemporary Japanese dishes to all-American pizzas to healthy Thai salads and greens. Depending on your mood, you can choose from the elegant dining restaurants, or you might prefer the laid-back alfresco cafes. Shopping also keeps the city abuzz. Specialty stores include rare and vintage finds, from the gardening books and electric furniture, fiesta dinnerware and old photographs, as well as restored goods, such as vintage wooden cutting boards, southern French crockery, and white enamel cookware. There are also classic and one-room boutiques that offer pieces for men and women, with a well-curated collection of shoes and boots to match. You may also find shops featuring own-brand clothes and jewelry for men and women, sold alongside a distinct merchandise mix of non-clothing items that reflect the owner's interests.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
Our journey of the history of Arab manuscripts has taken us to the Far East, China, in the year 105 AD. A Chinese inventor named Cai Lun created a unique way of producing paper. He used worn rags, old ropes, and tree bark to produce paper. This paper would be known as al-Kaghid. The Chinese inventor Cai Lun prepared the first paste used to make paper from woven fabric. He sliced it up and mixed it with water, and then he would press the water out. He also prepared paste for paper out of hemp pulp, bamboo, and mulberry bark. The Japanese also used natural products to make paper. There are many stories about how paper arrived to Arab countries. However, most of them overlap with the possibility that in the summer of 134 Hijri, the Arabs captured some Chinese people in one of their battles in Central Asia and took them to Samarkand. These Chinese individuals knew how to make paper, and they taught the Arabs. Al-Kaghid is an Arabized word for paper. It is said to be a Persian word of origin, and there is a possibility that it is a Chinese word in origin. The manufacturing of carré paper was very meticulous and took several days to finalize. White hemp, which is a fibrous plant, would have its threads and fibers extracted from its bark to manufacture paper. The hemp would be soaked in water, then combed down with a brush until it softens. Lime water is then added, which involves using a white substance prepared by heating limestones in special kilns. It is then left to cool and have the water drained from it. The water is used to soak the hemp for several nights. The soft fibers are pressed and placed under the sun to dry. At night, the fibers are returned to the lime water once again, and left again till the morning to be pressed once again. This process goes on for 3 or more nights, till the fibers whiten. They would replace the lime water twice a day. After the fibers would dry, they were cut with specialized tools. They were then soaked in fresh water for 7 days. And this water would be changed daily until the lime water residue would wash out. The fibers would be pressed delicately in a mortar and pestle, or moist, until they flattened out, and there were no knots left. The paste would be dissolved in a bit of clean water until it became similar to fine silk. Special wooden molds were made for the paper, depending on the requests of those who ordered them to be made. And it would contain many holes. The mold would be covered in water, and the paste would be placed on the mold. And it would be evened out by hand to have an equal thickness throughout the mold. The mold is inverted onto a wet wooden board, which it would stick to, and it would be left to dry until it would fall off on its own. The wooden board would be sprinkled with water, and once it dried up slightly, the first side of the paper would be coated with a hemp mixture. The first side is placed on a wooden board, and the other side is coated in the same manner. When soaking and starching al-karid paper, they would use rice starch after boiling and cooking it in a clean pot, draining it with a clean cloth, and using it to soak the paper. The more the process was repeated, the more aged and refined the paper would become. The color paper, they would add saffron to the starch solution, pour it into a bowl, and then gently dip the paper into the solution so that it would not crumble. The paper would then be dried on a fine thread in a shady area and flipped several times until it dries. It is finally polished with a glass polisher. This paper would be finally ready to be used. Paper is characterized by being lightweight, small in size, portable, and affordable. These factors made it a mainstay of expressing intellectual findings and thought. It was used in the art of calligraphy, especially in the Islamic East. All of this made al-karid paper a strong competitor to papyrus and parchment. The Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid ordered that people only write on al-karid paper, and that was because leathers were capable of being erased and reused, which made them susceptible to forgery. This is contrary to paper, which would be ruined if someone tried to erase something off of it. If a person tried to scrape or rub off something, then markings would be evident. In addition to its other advantages, paper was widely used in writing manuscripts. Despite the use of parchment attempting to hold on to its relevancy, it became one of the tools of scholars, commoners, students of knowledge, writers, merchants, paper makers, and those of prestige and power. Al-Jahiz said the following about paper: "It is sufficient for a person to carry a little bit of paper with their belongings and provisions due to how lightweight and small it is, unlike leather, which is heavier. If a person wanted to carry enough to last the duration of their travels, it would not suffice to carry a camel's worth." The Egyptian publishing house has one of the earliest books to be copied onto paper. It is a manuscript titled The Risala in Fiqh by al-Shafi'i, and it dates back to the beginning of the 3rd century Hijri. The oldest Arab manuscript written on paper, according to the latest data, is the Etiquette of Philosophy by the writer Hunayn bin Ishaq, who passed away in the year 260 Hijri. This manuscript is still preserved in the library of the University of Tehran, and it dates back to 249 Hijri. With the increase in demand for paper, the number of centers that produced it increased, and it was no longer confined to Samarkand or Baghdad. The paper industry reached Transoxiana, the Levant and Damascus, Tiberias, and Tripoli. Samarkand remained a central hub for the production of paper, and they continued to produce the finest and most premium types of paper. This new human invention and the drive Arabs had to produce it led to many forms of paper being developed, including al-Sulaymani, al-Talhi, al-Nuhi, al-Faruni, al-Jafari, and al-Tahri. All of these names were given in relation to the governor of the city in which the paper was made. The development of the paper industry, especially al-Qaghid, and its spread throughout Islamic countries, invigorated the production of written artworks and authorship, and helped it transcend into a new era. It was accompanied by a development in the markets of papermaking, scribes, calligraphy, and calligraphers. All of this changed the course of Arab manuscripts, as they were elevated to a level with increased competition after the diversification and growth of this world that is full of art and intellectual creativity. This made us delve further into exploring the depths of our manuscripts, to stand at the tools of the greats of our history, as they explored, mastered, and created.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers